Chapter 317. The sound of swords being drawn in unison made Julian and the others stop in their tracks, and all of them turned toward the long line outside the restaurant with surprised looks on their faces. Ricky had rushed over with his employee with the intention of exposing this restaurant's true colors so that his rotisserie could return to the 29th place that it rightfully belonged to. However, he was given a massive fright by what he was seeing, and he immediately stopped in his tracks. After the swords were unsheathed, a deathly silence ensued. Many of the ordinary people in the long line were a little intimidated by the gleaming swords, but their insistence on the flavor of tofu pudding made them stubbornly stand on the spot. They glared at the other party without any intention of backing down. "Ugly duckling, do you think they're finally going to fight? We've been waiting every day, and they're really drawing their swords this time." Amy sat down on a small stool with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She rested her chin on her little hand, and her eyes were wide with anticipation. Why are there so many people in line? And why are they drawing their swords? Could it be that there's more than one person with the same idea as me, and they're all here to cause trouble? Ricky looked at the two long lines in front of the restaurant with a bewildered expression, and all of the knights and swordsmen in the president's line drew their swords. "Boss, what should we do now?" the employee behind him asked in a quiet voice. He had also been quite intimidated by this scene. At a time like this, we obviously need someone who can raise his voice. Our Ricky's rotisserie is the biggest victim of this fraud, and as the owner of the restaurant, I'm naturally not going to back down. Ricky's heart immediately began to pound violently, and blood surged from his chest into his brain. His face immediately became flushed, and he strode toward the two long lines before raising his arm and yelling, "Down with this fraudulent restaurant. Boycott this fraudulent food. Destroy this fucking restaurant." The situation at the entrance of the restaurant was extremely tense, and it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. As such, Ricky's yell was clearly audible to all of the customers. All of the customers turned to Ricky in unison, and their eyes were filled with surprise and concern for a mentally handicapped child. Although the sweet and salty factions were fighting, no one would agree to the accusations of cheating, and smashing this fucking restaurant. These votes were cast by them one by one. They were not satisfied with such a low ranking. Wasn't this guy deliberately slapping them in the face by spouting such nonsense? Moreover, he wanted to smash the restaurant. Many people thought of the Burning Legion, who had been rewarded with Ruggiemo yesterday. If they acted courageously and helped Mr. Mac deal with this troublemaker in advance, maybe Mr. Mac would be happy and give each of them a Ruggiemo. At the thought of this, the guest who had already unsheathed his sword looked at Richie with an unfriendly gaze. The werewolves from yesterday were too powerful, but it was still easy for them to deal with such a fat, ordinary person. "Bad guy. Father, it's too troublesome to change the gate. Let's not let him in this time." Amy's gaze also fell on Richie. She lowered her little hand from her chin, and a bluish-purple flame danced on her fingertips. Everyone's gazes made Richie's heart rate accelerate even faster. He enjoyed the feeling of being the center of attention, and the rush of blood in his head prevented him from detecting the hidden message hidden in everyone's expressions. The only thing in his mind was that he had become a fighter against fraud. He was going to lead the angry crowd to break through the restaurant's door and smash the restaurant that relied on fraudulent votes to get into the rankings. He was going to drag out the shameful boss and beat him up. He was going to make him admit that he had committed fraud in front of everyone. It had been many years since he had last felt this kind of hot-blooded feeling. It was simply too exhilarating. Down with this fraudulent restaurant. Smash this fucking restaurant. Richie had already begun to unconsciously march forward. He clenched his fists, and his face was flushed red as he yelled with all his might. His eyes were bloodshot, and it looked like he was going to take action. Smash it. Smash it. The employee was also affected by his boss's enthusiasm, and his face was flushed red as he followed behind Richie. He didn't think that his boss would be such a hot-blooded person. Just the thought of being able to lead his customers to smash this fraudulent restaurant made his blood boil. Those two. Did they drink too much fake alcohol this early in the morning? Cece looked at the two of them making their way toward the restaurant's entrance with an adorable look on her face. There are always some people who like to court death. Julian pursed his lips as he glanced at the portly Richie, and his interest was completely piqued. Richie quickly made his way to the restaurant's entrance, and only then did he turn around to look at the two long lines that had suddenly fallen silent. He had thought that all he had to do was wave his arms, and everyone would rally around him to smash open the gate and follow him into the restaurant. But what was going on with this strange silence? Looks like we're all civilized people, so we need a hot-blooded person to lead the team. I'm naturally more than willing to pass on this responsibility. Richie looked at the crowd, and could feel everyone's eyes on him. They were all looking at him as if he were a hero, and that made him even more confident. His entire body was filled with energy and passion. Don't panic, everyone. I am the owner of Richie's Rotisserie, Richie Behrman, the embodiment of fairness and justice. I'm sure everyone has seen the abnormal ranking of this restaurant after the announcement of today's Aiden Square food competition. That's right, everyone is right to be angry. I've never even heard of this small restaurant in the corner before, yet 2 of its dishes have made it into the top 30, and 5 of its dishes have all made it into the top 100. This is something that even long-established restaurants that have been in business for decades can't achieve. Hence, I'm certain that there's definitely something wrong with this restaurant's ranking on the Aiden Square food competition. What rubbish braised chicken and rice. Laji Rugiemo. How could those disgusting dishes deserve to make it into the top 30? This kind of vote rigging is really shameful. As a loyal fan of the Aiden Square food competition, I can't allow something like this to happen right under my nose. We have to vent our anger and let those bastards who are trying to manipulate the Aiden Square food competition know that we're not idiots. Let's smash this restaurant and return the Aiden Square food competition to its former glory. Richie became more and more agitated as he spoke, and in the end, he waved his arms and yelled out a slogan before taking large strides toward the restaurant's entrance. Chapter 318. Bam! A muffled thump rang out as Ricky, who was crashing into the restaurant door with his shoulder, was slapped in the face by the door, and he was sent flying back. The fat man, who weighed over 100 kilograms, was sent crashing into the crowd. The crowd immediately dispersed, opening up a space for him. They watched as he crashed onto the ground with a loud bang. He laid on the ground with his face facing upwards. There was a red door mark on his face. His expression was absent-minded, as if he was a little dazed after being slapped. Meg also faltered slightly upon seeing this. His hand was still on the door handle, and he had just finished his breakfast and was about to remind Amy to go to class. However, he didn't expect that someone would be sent flying through the door just as he was about to open it. He was a little embarrassed as he looked at the portly middle-aged man lying on the ground. If this was a customer, then wouldn't he have accidentally injured him? He sent someone flying through the air just as he opened the door. As expected, Mr. Mack is not to be trifled with. All of the customers looked at Meg with peculiar expressions. Ricky looked like an ordinary person, but he was still a burly man weighing over 100 kilograms, so it was quite a shock that he was sent flying through the air just like that. Of course, the customers who were about to attack him were the most disappointed. However, before they could do anything, Meg had already taken care of Ricky. Wow, Father is so awesome. Amy withdrew the small fireball in her hand and clapped her little hands with her mouth slightly agape. She looked up at Meg with reverence on her little face. How could this be? Could it be that the owner of this restaurant is also a powerful figure? Ricky was lying on the ground, and he could feel a stinging sensation on his face. Being sent flying by a door was not a good feeling at all. In particular, the sight of Mag with one hand on the doorknob made the rage in his heart surge even further. He hadn't even made a move yet, and he was the one who got hit first. This guy was clearly the owner of this restaurant, but it didn't matter. Even though he had been knocked down, he still had tens of thousands of friends behind him. All of them were wielding weapons, and there was no lack of orcs and demons among them. No matter how powerful the owner of this restaurant was, he would definitely be the one getting beaten up. With that in mind, Ricky regained his confidence. He endured the burning sensation on his face as he sat up and waved his arm. This owner is trying to cheat the rankings, and he's beating people up. Where's the justice? Where's the justice? Everyone, charge! Smash! Smash, smash my ass! A demon that was close to 2 meters tall slapped him across the face, and slapped him back to the ground. He then gave him a kick, and angrily said, "I do have a lot of anger in my heart, and I have nowhere to vent it. It's indeed because of Mamie Restaurant's ranking, but it's the exact opposite of what you said, it's because it's ranked too low." Exactly. The last time I ate the barbecue in your shitty barbecue shop, I found a bug in it, but in the end, you insisted that it was my own bug. Today, I caught you, right? What about the brawny men who beat me up last time? Mr. Mac's food is more than 100 times better than your restaurant's barbecue. Who gave you the confidence and courage to challenge Mr. Mac? What kind of disgusting name is that? I'm drooling at the mention of Ruggiemo now. Stop talking. Brothers, let's not beat up our own people. This guy who dares to slander Amy's and accuse us of cheating is the real heresy. Leave an empty spot for me, I'm going to kick him too. The entrance of the restaurant was instantly thrown into chaos. The customers surrounded Ricky and began to beat him up. Punches and kicks rained down on his body, and the sounds were so dense that it sounded like the sound of a drum. Stop hitting me, stop hitting me. I'm an ally, I'm an ally. Stop hitting me, aw. Don't hit my face. Ricky was a little dumbstruck by the barrage of attacks, and only after a while did he come to his senses. What ally? I'm beating you up. The sweet and savory factions have formed an alliance because of you. An old woman jabbed Ricky in the stomach with her walking stick, and was a little angry. I agree. If we give each other 1 star, those guys will only benefit from it. I don't think the sweet tofu pudding is that good, but if it's made by Mr. Mac, then it's definitely better than other people's. That's right, hurting each other will only result in a lose-lose situation. We should band together and give each other 5 stars. Show those guys the true power of our tofu pudding. The furious customers' punches and kicks instantly drowned out Ricky's cries of agony. Under his incitement, they quickly reached an agreement to cooperate. Seeing as Mr. Mac was selling the same number of sweet and savory tofu puddings every day, there was no way that the sweet and savory tofu puddings would be able to rise up the rankings. As such, a cooperation was the only way out for them in order to climb up the rankings. Boss. The employee looked on with a dumbstruck expression. Just a moment ago, he had been about to charge into the restaurant with his boss, but in the blink of an eye, his boss had been beaten to the ground, and he couldn't even see him anymore. There's another one here. A brawny man grabbed the employee by the collar and tossed him into the crowd, joining in on the beating. What's going on? Meg was just about to apologize, but he was also a little dumbstruck upon seeing this. After listening to the customers for a while, he quickly figured out what was going on. It appeared that these two had come to cause trouble after seeing the Aiden Square food competition this morning. However, they didn't even get to enter the restaurant before being punished by the customers. It was quite a tragic scene. Meg wasn't going to show any mercy to people who dared to cause trouble at his restaurant. He had to establish the restaurant's rules, and sometimes, he had to make an example out of these people. However, Meg was quite touched by the fact that the customers were taking the initiative to deal with the troublemakers. These were a bunch of customers who had only come to the restaurant to eat, but they were actually so concerned and angry for the sake of the restaurant's reputation. He was touched by the actions of strangers. It's not a big deal, so let's not kill anyone. It's still early in the morning, and it's not easy for the patrol office, Meg said to the crowd with a smile. The customers all burst into laughter upon hearing this. Mr. Mac's words weren't very kind. There were so many people here, and if they were tired, they could just switch to another group and beat the crap out of those two. Chapter 319. Mr. Mac, what happened in the smithy next door last night? Why did all the houses collapse? Harrison was squeezed out after a few kicks. He panted heavily as he looked at Mag curiously. The smithy next to the restaurant was still in ruins, and a group of dwarf stonemasons were cleaning up the rubble. They picked up one weapon after another, and then started to rebuild the house with great efficiency. However, there was a huge crater in the middle of the smithy, which was rather eye-catching, as if a fierce battle had taken place there. Even the two houses next to it had collapsed. Maybe a crater suddenly appeared down there. Meg shrugged. It was best not to tell anyone about the explosion. If the Great Temple or the City Lord's castle found out that Mobai had created such a powerful weapon, they would probably pay as much attention to it as the steam engine. If a weapon that could be controlled by a normal person but was powerful enough to threaten a powerful giant dragon was released to the world, it would definitely have an unpredictable impact on the Norland continent. If Mobai were to research it alone, it would probably take a very long time to come up with a rough idea. However, if the Great Temple and the City Lord's castle were to gather all the resources in Chaos City, they would probably be able to create a powerful weapon in no time. Meg didn't like this way of changing the world. If it happened too quickly, he wouldn't be able to control and predict what would happen. I see. That restaurant is really lucky. Harrison nodded. The three shops next to it had all been damaged, but the restaurant next door was completely fine. Teacher Julian, what time is Amy's class this morning? Meg asked with a smile as he looked at Julian, who was making his way over. His gaze lingered on Lulu and Cece for a while. Lulu's face was still a little pale, but she seemed to be fine. Cece, on the other hand, looked like she had completely recovered. She was an expert in healing magic, so her self-healing ability was also very good. 8 a.m. We'll start after breakfast. Julian looked at Amy with a smile and said, "Good morning, little Amy." "Morning, Teacher Turtleshell." Amy also stood up with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and greeted Julian. Then, she looked at Cece and Lulu, who were following behind Julian, and asked in surprise, "Big Sister Cece, Big Bear, are you two done?" "That's right. After eating the delicious chicken soup made by little Amy's father yesterday, we're all better now." Cece smiled happily and reached out to stroke Amy's head. I knew that father's chicken soup is the best." Amy nodded with pride on her face. "Thank you, Mr. Mac, and the two ladies." Cece bowed to Meg and Yabamiya and Sally, and said gratefully, "You're welcome." Meg shook his head with a smile. Amy liked this girl too much, so he also had a very good impression of this druid girl who had a great affinity with children and animals. "It's all right." Yabamiya hurriedly waved her hands with an apologetic expression. Sally nodded slightly. Her thoughts were very simple. They had indeed helped them the day before, so there was nothing wrong with accepting their gratitude. "It's time for business." "Welcome." Meg looked back at his watch and smiled at the customers before fully opening the restaurant's doors. As for the two guys who had been beaten up by the angry customers, he completely ignored them. Seeing as they were here to pick a fight, they should have been prepared to be scolded. It was too late for them to regret their actions. Sally and Yabamiya stood on either side of the restaurant, one with a smile and the other with a cold expression, and began their day's work. The customers filed into the restaurant, and no one paid any attention to Ricky and the waiter. However, some customers didn't forget to kick them as they passed by. Soon, the restaurant's entrance was empty. I'll be back. Ricky looked up at Amy's signboard, and his face was swollen. He crawled away with great difficulty. This world was too crazy. These people weren't here to mess with the restaurant, they were really ruthless. Boss, wait for me. The waiter also crawled away with great difficulty. What the hell was this? He only shouted a few words, and he was beaten up for no reason. The release of the rankings board in the morning was like a massive bomb that exploded between the sweet and savory factions. However, the conflict that was about to escalate was instead alleviated after they beat up Ricky and his employee, and they even came to a consensus that it was better to help one another rather than harm one another. Meg was naturally happy to see this happen. Even though the braised chicken and rice and Laji Rugiamo had successfully made it into the top 30, it would still be a great help to the restaurant's reputation if the other dishes could also rise up the rankings. The system's goal was very clear, it wanted to increase the restaurant's reputation. Top 30 this time, what about next time? Top 20, or even top 10? These were all things that Meg had to consider. The morning hours passed in a rush. After Julian finished his breakfast, Amy went to class with him. To Meg's surprise, Julian took in Cece and Lulu. He was already a little surprised that he had stood up for them last night. After all, the eccentric Julian wasn't a benevolent old man. Why would he take in this druid couple? Alright, I gave the sweet tofu pudding 5 stars, but that won't change my persistence and love for savory tofu pudding. Then I'll give the savory tofu pudding 5 stars as well. Our ultimate goal is to make tofu pudding reach the top of the food rankings list. At the entrance of the restaurant, customers were talking to each other proudly. Boss, they only had 1 serving of tofu pudding, but they put in 2 different flavors. Does that count as cheating? Yabamiya looked at Meg with a worried expression. Well, it's hard to say. Even though we didn't do it, if we look into it carefully, there are indeed some problems. Meg thought for a while and felt a headache coming on. He didn't care about cheating. Getting into the top 30 with his own abilities was his true ability. However, now that the sweet and savory fans had reached a verbal agreement, Meg wasn't sure if cheating was against the rules. In any case, the braised chicken and rice and Rugiamo tickets weren't a problem. As long as they stayed within the top 30, Meg wasn't worried at all. Chapter 320. Recruit. Mabai patted the dust off his hands, and looked up at Lulu, who was almost twice his height. He studied her carefully for a while, and then shook his head. You're a good blacksmith, but if you're too stupid, you won't be able to make any good iron. Besides, I've never taken any apprentices or hired any workers. Boss, he's actually just a clumsy talker, but he's very smart. He can learn everything quickly. If you take him as your apprentice, he'll be able to help you do a lot of things in no time. That way, you'll be able to make more weapons and make more money. Cece stepped forward and pinched Lulu's waist to stop her from talking. She looked at Mabai with a smile, and then glanced at the blacksmith shop that was still being cleaned, and said, If you don't believe me, you can ask Lulu to help clean the shop. He's very efficient. Well. Mabai pondered after hearing Cece's words. He looked at Lulu, and then at Cece, and finally nodded. Alright, then let him try to work first. But I can't promise that I'll take him as a worker. I'm running a small business, and I can't afford to hire idlers. Thank you, boss. I'm sure Lulu will satisfy you. Cece smiled happily. She clenched her little fists and looked at Lulu with encouragement. Lulu, you can do it. I believe you're the best. You'll definitely pass Bossy's test. I'll do my best. A smile also appeared on Lulu's face. Cece was working in the magic potion shop, and he obviously couldn't be a man who relied on his woman to make a living. Therefore, it would be best if he could find a job in the blacksmith shop next door. Meg just came out of the restaurant, and a smile appeared on his face when he saw this scene. It seemed that this druid couple was really going to settle down in Chaos City and enjoy the hard-won stability. This was a good thing. Amy had one more person to play with, and Cece was very friendly to her. How about this? You help clean up these collapsed buildings. Do whatever they ask you to do, Mobai instructed Lulu before walking straight to Meg. All right. Lulu nodded as he strode toward the ruins. Even though he hadn't fully recovered from his injuries, with his physique and regenerative abilities, he naturally had no problem helping to clean up the ruins. Meanwhile, Cece returned to the magic potion shop and began her first day of work. Mr. Mac, your restaurant is doing so well. Do you need to expand it? Mobai walked up and asked Meg directly. Meg, who was just going out to take a breath of fresh air, was taken aback. He had thought about expanding the restaurant before. After all, 64 seats were indeed too little given the number of customers in the restaurant. However, expanding the restaurant was clearly the only option without compressing the dining space of every customer. However, Meg didn't have any say in the expansion of the restaurant. After all, the restaurant was built by the system. If he wanted to maintain the same style, the expansion naturally had to be done by the system. Given the system's nature, expansion was definitely not negotiable. It was most likely related to the level of the restaurant. Actually, what gave Meg a headache wasn't the system. Instead, it was the location of the restaurant. It was in the northwest corner of the Aden Square, and further west was the Bawtai prison. Meg didn't dare to think about tearing down the walls and moving the restaurant into the Bawtai prison. Furthermore, Mobai's blacksmith shop was close to the east. Mobai's blacksmith shop had been here for decades. He definitely wouldn't transfer the blacksmith shop to him so casually to expand the restaurant. However, he didn't know what Mobai meant by taking the initiative to ask this question. It's like this. Actually, I bought these 4 shops years ago. Originally, I wanted to expand the blacksmith shop if the business was good. In the blink of an eye, 40 or 50 years have passed, and I've been too lazy to do so. Mobai smiled as he pointed at the shop near Urian's, and said, I'm sorry about what happened this morning. Furthermore, you gave me a very important suggestion, so I plan to reconstruct the blacksmith shop next to the magic potion shop. We'll keep the 3 shops here. If Boss Mag needs to expand the restaurant, I'll sell them to you at market price. I didn't expect the boss of Mobai to be a man with a huge amount of real estate. Meg was a little surprised. He didn't expect the shops next to the blacksmith shop to be abandoned by Mobai. Then, he directly asked in his mind, System, can the restaurant be expanded now? The level of the restaurant is too low. The host doesn't have the authority to expand the restaurant or add tables. Please upgrade the level of the restaurant as soon as possible to unlock more authority, the system's voice sounded. I knew it. Meg wasn't too surprised. However, according to the system, the restaurant should be able to be expanded as the level of the restaurant increased to accommodate more customers at the same time. In that case, he could only choose to expand the restaurant to the right. Then, Mobai's proposal to leave the 3 shops for him to expand the restaurant became very important. After all, the entire Aden Square was built under the planning of the city lord's castle. Expanding the square into the square was illegal. If it was built, it would probably be torn down the next day. Meg didn't want to take this risk. Due to the lack of funds and manpower, the restaurant can't be expanded at the moment. However, I've actually thought about Mobai's proposal. If you can really reserve these 3 shops for me for a while, I'd be very grateful. Meg looked at Mobai with a smile. He also expressed his interest in expanding the 3 shops, but he really didn't have the spare money to buy them. In any case, the restaurant couldn't be expanded at the moment. Okay, as long as you're sure you want them, Mr. Mack. I'll get them to put up an empty shell to fool the inspectors. Let me know when you're ready. Money isn't something that's urgent. I've left them here for decades anyway. Mobai nodded with a smile. He chatted with Meg for a while longer before returning to the ruins to discuss the construction of a new blacksmith shop with the dwarven craftsmen. A friendly city. Meg looked at the dwarf craftsmen who were working hard in the ruins, and his lips curled up. If the restaurant could be expanded to the size of 4 shops, it would be able to accommodate 200 to 300 people at the same time. Coupled with the increased efficiency of cooking as his power increased, the restaurant's turnover would definitely increase. System, have you decided on the God of Cookery promotion will yet? It's already been 5 days, Mag said in his heart as he turned to enter the restaurant. Chapter 321. Andrew, did you hear? On the first day of the Aiden Square food competition today, all 5 of Mamie's dishes made it into the top 100, and 2 of them even made it into the top 30. Myers stood outside Andrew's pork chop shop, and looked at Andrew, who was chopping up pork bones with a butcher's knife, with an excited expression. My employee told me about it this morning. What surprised me was that 3 of her dishes didn't make it into the top 50, even though all of them could have made it into the top 5. Andrew put down the knife in his hand, and was a little disappointed. It's not like you don't know about the rankings. With Mamie's scale, and this being her first time competing for the Aiden Square food competition, it's already very impressive that 2 of her dishes made it into the top 30. Myers sighed, and said, that's the private property of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. Look, you've been squeezed out of the top 20 this time. At this rate, you'll be squeezed out of the top 30 sooner or later. Yeah, our restaurant has been open for a decade or 2, and we can sell over 1,000 servings of our signature dishes every day, yet we still can't make it into the top 10. Those guys are getting more and more shameless. Bernice had also arrived at some point, and was a little indignant. I think the Aiden Square food competition this time is going to be interesting. Mr. Mack managed to make it into the top 30 in such an unreasonable manner, and he even took 2 of the spots. Those guys who paid for the rankings are probably going to go crazy, and the Aiden Chamber of Commerce is going to be in a very passive position. This kind of situation has never happened before. Old Man Bishop chuckled as he walked over with his hands clasped behind his back. His scallion pancake didn't make it into the top 100 this time, so he didn't really care anymore. Yeah, it's been many years since a dark horse like this has appeared. It's just that Mr. Mack is a lone wolf, and if he really does piss off a colossus like the Aiden Chamber of Commerce, it won't be easy for him to clean up the mess. Bernice was a little concerned. Everyone gathered together to chat. They were happy that someone who could disrupt the Aiden Square food competition that was controlled by the Aiden Chamber of Commerce had appeared, but at the same time, they were also worried for Mamie's. Young Master, the owner of Ricky's rotisserie, Ricky, was beaten this morning. Should we report this to the president? In a large room in the Chamber of Commerce building, Mars turned to Cyril, who was playing with a colorful snake in a leather chair behind a desk, and asked in a respectful voice. Ricky? Who's that? Why would he report to the president if he was beaten up? Cyril asked without even raising his head. Ricky's Rotisserie is a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and it has paid the deposit for the 30th spot on the Aiden Square food competition for 3 consecutive months. Today is the first day of this month's Aiden Square food competition, and Ricky's Rotisserie is ranked 31st. The restaurant that knocked him out of the top 30 is a restaurant by the name of Mamie Restaurant, and he was beaten by the owner of that restaurant. Mars paused for a moment before continuing. DeVoe and Gourmet were captured because of that restaurant. It is said that one of DeVoe's thugs was killed by the owner. Who's the owner of Mamie's? Cyril finally raised his head upon hearing this, and a hostile expression appeared on his face as he turned to Mars. Are you trying to oppose our Chamber of Commerce? The owner's name is Meg, but they couldn't find anything about him. Most customers refer to him as Mr. Mac. He opened Mamie's in the northwestern corner of the Aiden Square a month ago, and he's attracted a lot of customers in just a month. His dishes are extremely expensive, and even the cheapest dish costs 200 copper coins. As for his conflict with Gourmet, Mars gave Cyril a brief introduction of Meg's identity, as well as the conflict between Gourmet and Meg. He's just an arrogant clown. He's just the owner of a small restaurant, yet he dares to threaten our Aiden Chamber of Commerce. Cyril pursed his lips with disdain upon hearing this. There's no need to report such a trivial matter to the president. Just tell the Catering Association to remove this restaurant from the rankings board, and then go to his restaurant as often as you can. Make sure he can't survive in the Aiden Square. Let's see if our Aiden Chamber of Commerce or his small restaurant goes bankrupt first. But his daughter is the disciple of 2 great magic casters. If we do that. Mars was a little concerned. What does that have to do with anything? We didn't do anything to them. Those 2 great magic casters won't be able to do anything to us in Chaos City. We can spend some money to bribe those fatties from the Catering Association. They'll be more proactive than us. Cyril smiled and said, there's nothing in this world that money can't solve. Mars opened his mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. That's enough, Mars. You're becoming more and more cowardly. Back when your father was under the president, he was very decisive. Cyril took a glance at Mars before wrapping the colorful snake around his hand. He then rose to his feet and made his way out of the door. However, he paused at the door and said, sometimes, people have to make a choice. Those who waver will only be the first to be abandoned. Second young master, it's really a difficult choice for me to make to put all my chips on you. Besides, the first lesson that my father taught me was to never put all my eggs in the same basket. Mars shook his head as he made his way out of the room. System, what did you just say? Meg faltered slightly upon hearing the system's words. The host can choose a dish as one of the choices on the wheel. After you complete the tofu pudding mission, you'll have the opportunity to spin out the recipe for that dish, the system replied. System, why is your conscience back today? Meg raised an eyebrow. As a system with a conscience, I refuse to accept such a question. The system was a little displeased. Can I really choose any dish? Meg still didn't quite believe it. As long as it's a dish from Earth, you can choose any dish, the system confirmed. Then let me think about it. Meg thought for a moment. Shandong cuisine, Sichuan cuisine, Cantonese cuisine, Jiangsu cuisine, Zhejiang cuisine, Fujian cuisine, Hunan cuisine, Anhui cuisine. All types of famous cuisines and snacks flashed through his mind. He had eaten too many delicious dishes in the past, so he was having a difficult time making a choice. He was curious as to what dishes would taste like after coming to this world and using the special ingredients provided by the system and his top-notch cooking skills. He pondered from morning to noon, and the restaurant was about to open for business, but Meg still hadn't decided what dish to choose. Chapter 322. As soon as Meg opened the door, Amy, who was wearing a black magician robe, rushed over. He picked her up and spun her around, then gently held her in his arms. He looked at the giggling Amy and asked with a smile, "What made our little Amy so happy?" "I'm super happy to be hugged by father every day." Amy looked up at Meg with a matter-of-fact expression on her little face. "What a sweet little mouth." Meg looked at Amy's little face, and the smile on his face became even brighter. The most precious thing he had ever received in his life was probably Amy. "I'm so envious of Mr. Mac for having such a cute little daughter." "Yeah. Seeing the father and daughter show off every day, I want to give birth to a daughter." "Come on, you don't even have a wife." "I'm just waiting for my wife to give birth to a daughter now." The long line of customers at the entrance of the restaurant looked at this scene with kind smiles on their faces. They could see the loving interaction between Mr. Mac and Little Boss every day, and their faces were full of envy and jealousy, but their moods had indeed unconsciously improved. "Little Amy, father can now fulfill one of your wishes about food. Other than the dishes in the restaurant, what else do you want to eat? Father can cook anything for you." Meg ignored the envious gazes and carried Amy into the restaurant. He smiled at the little girl in his arms and asked, "Really? Anything?" Amy's eyes lit up, and she looked at Meg and repeated, "Yes, anything is fine." Meg nodded with a smile. The system had promised to cook any dish, so as long as Amy could name it, it would naturally be fine. Then Amy thought for a while, then clenched her little fists and looked at Meg expectantly. "I want to eat the Manchu Han Imperial Feast." "Ah." Meg's expression froze, and he suddenly realized that he seemed to have exaggerated a little. He didn't expect that the little girl still hadn't forgotten his promise to Amy. "Father said that the Manchu Han Imperial Feast is super delicious, so can you cook it for Amy now?" Amy didn't seem to notice Meg's embarrassment and continued to ask expectantly. "This. Father can't cook it now because the Manchu Han Imperial Feast isn't just one dish. Father hasn't learned how to cook so many dishes yet, and we don't have that many ingredients." Meg was a little embarrassed as he explained to Amy. "So, Amy can't eat the Manchu Han Imperial Feast now?" Amy's face. She looked at father's embarrassed, and she quickly smiled and shook her head. And said, "It's okay, don't be sad, father. Amy doesn't want to eat the Manchu Han Imperial Feast." "Good girl." Meg looked at the warm smile on the little girl's face, and his heart warmed. She was really a sensible little girl, but this couldn't be. He gently hugged her and whispered in her ear, "Trust father, I will definitely cook a table full of Manchu Han Imperial Feast for you in the future, the kind that you won't be able to finish in 3 days and 3 nights. Yes, Amy believes father will definitely do it. Father has never lied to Amy. Amy nodded. She looked up at Meg and asked, "If we can't finish it, can Amy invite Jessica, Big Sister Cece, Big Bear, Master Turtle, and Master Halfbeard to eat with us? It would be a pity if we can't finish it. Of course, Aisha, Mia, and all of Amy's friends can come and eat." Meg smiled and nodded. The little girl was really hospitable. "Father, you're the best." Amy hugged Meg's neck and kissed him on the cheek with a happy smile on her face. "Then, is there anything in particular that Amy wants to eat right now?" "Roast beef, roast lamb chops. Anything is fine." Meg patted Amy's head and asked. Amy thought for a moment before replying with an expectant look in her eyes, I want to eat fish, the kind that swims in the water. I heard from Daphne that fish meat is super delicious and tender, but there are a lot of bones in it. She even showed me a fish bone last time. It's translucent and so beautiful, just like a needle." Meg looked at Amy, and he felt as if his heart had been stabbed. The best and most expensive food that Amy had ever eaten was pancakes, but she had never eaten fish even at the age of 4. This kind of food could only be considered a home-cooked dish, but in her eyes, it was like an unattainable treasure. "All right, Father will cook fish for you in the next few days. I'll make the best roast fish in the world." Meg looked at Amy with an earnest expression. He had already decided what dish he was going to choose: spicy roast fish. Roast fish. Does that mean you're going to roast fish over a fire? Like roast beef or roast lamb chops? Amy's little face was filled with curiosity. "That's right, but it's also a little different. You'll find out when the time comes, Amy." Meg kept her in suspense. Sichuan roast fish was roasted first, then stewed, and it really was a little different from roast steak. In any case, as long as it's cooked by Father, it'll definitely be super delicious. That way, Amy can also eat super delicious fish. I'm going to show Daphne the fish bones as well. Amy nodded obediently with anticipation in her eyes. What new spell did Amy learn from Teacher Julian today? Meg looked at Amy with a curious expression. Meow, Ugly Duckling had already arrived at Meg's feet, and it looked up at Amy with excitement in its eyes. "Father, put me down, and I'll show you." Amy moved a little and got down from Meg's arms. She reached out her left hand with a sincere expression on her little face. Meg and Ugly Duckling both took half a step back. He didn't doubt Amy's magical aptitude in the slightest, but she had only learned a spell this morning, so he was still a little concerned about Amy's ability to control the spell. If she made a mistake and was accidentally injured by his daughter, then there would be no way for him to explain. Sally and Yabamiya were also looking at Amy with curiosity in their eyes. With Amy's superb aptitude, what kind of spell could she learn from Julian in just a single morning? "In my name, I summon the flames of extreme frost," Amy said in a soft voice. Amy said softly. With a sizzling sound, a small blue and white flame suddenly appeared on her left palm. Although it looked like a flame, with the appearance of this flame, the surrounding temperature instantly dropped by a lot. Even breathing out of this flame would cause a white mist to appear. Flames of extreme frost. Meg was a little surprised to see the bluish-white flame in Amy's hand, which was exuding a frosty aura. "That's right. Father, even though it's small, it's actually super powerful. Let me show you." Amy looked around before settling her gaze on Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling seemed to have sensed danger, and it arched its back, and its soft fur also stood on end as it turned to run. Chapter 323. The bluish-white flames drifted toward Ugly Duckling, which was about to run away. It didn't appear to be very fast, but it was still much faster than Ugly Duckling. It struck Ugly Duckling's body with a thump, and it instantly spread out to envelop Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling's body instantly stiffened, and the bluish-white flames around it spread out to form a huge cube of ice. Ugly Duckling's fur was still standing on end, and it wore a horrified expression. "Whoa!" Meg tried to grab Ugly Duckling, but he was clearly not as fast as the fireball. He didn't think that Amy would suddenly use Ugly Duckling as a target for her new spell. The little thing was less than a month old, and Amy's extreme frost flames could really kill it. What pure ice flames! Sally stared at Amy with a hint of surprise in her eyes. It had only been a single morning, yet Amy, who had never learned ice magic before, had already mastered such pure ice flames. This made her even more astonished by Amy's aptitude. "Is Ugly Duckling going to freeze to death?" Yabamiya was a little concerned. Even though Ugly Duckling usually ignored her, she still liked to play with it when Amy wasn't around when she went to class. "Father, look, this is the new spell I learned this morning, Extreme Frost Flames. Doesn't it look super awesome?" Amy withdrew her hand with a pleased expression, and looked at Meg with elation. Yes, it's super awesome, but ugly duckling. Meg nodded. Amy was naturally very talented to be able to learn such a spell in one morning. However, Ugly Duckling seemed to be dedicating itself to the cause of magic, and that made him a little concerned. Ugly Duckling will be fine. Teacher Julian said that if it's frozen by the extreme frost flames, there's still a chance it can survive. Amy seemed to have sensed Meg's concern, and she comforted him. A chance. Meg's expression became even more peculiar. This girl was so irresponsible. If Ugly Duckling were to die like this, it would be a great loss. Yes, there's a very high chance. Amy nodded seriously. Then let's find a way to get it out of the ice first. Meg said helplessly. He turned around and prepared to go to the kitchen to get a kitchen knife. This ice cube was not small, so it would probably take some time. That will do. Meg had only just turned around when a small bluish-purple fireball appeared in Amy's hand. She then casually tossed it toward Ugly Duckling. This time, it's most likely going to be cooked. Meg didn't have time to stop Amy this time, and could only watch as the fireball flew toward Ugly Duckling. This was a fireball that could send third-tier swordsmen and magic casters flying. If it were to land on Ugly Duckling's body, not even a speck of dust would be left behind. To everyone's surprise, the small fireball didn't explode upon landing on the ice cube. Instead, it enveloped the ice cube, and the thick ice cube instantly melted and vaporized. The bluish-white ice flames and the bluish-purple flames cancelled each other out, and the ice and flames around Ugly Duckling's body also disappeared at the same time. Ugly Duckling was still maintaining its arched back and bristling posture. After the ice cube disappeared, it stiffened for a second before shuddering. It then jumped over a meter away and climbed onto the counter, which was over a meter tall. It looked at Amy and Meg with a dumbstruck expression, as if it didn't understand what had just happened. It's completely fine. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, which was completely unscathed aside from being a little frightened. This quick freezing technique was truly extraordinary, and its defrosting technique was also superb. Wow, Ugly Duckling, you actually climbed up there yourself. Then you're not allowed to let me carry you in the future. You can do it yourself. Amy was also looking at Ugly Duckling with a surprised expression. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked down at the bottom of the counter upon hearing that. It then took a few steps back in fear, and shook its head at Amy with an aggrieved expression. I don't care. I saw you climb up there yourself. Amy shook her head in a righteous manner. Meg walked over, squatted down, and looked into Amy's eyes with a serious expression as he said, Amy, even though Ugly Duckling is fine, you can't test your magic directly on humans or animals in the future. If something happens, then we won't be able to make up for it. But I only did that because I was sure that it wouldn't harm Ugly Duckling. Amy looked at Meg with an aggrieved pout. Then I was wrong about you. Meg's heart immediately softened at the sight of Amy's pitiful expression. She was so kind, so Julian must have already told her that the ice wouldn't harm humans. Amy nodded with a proud expression, and said, I've already tested it on black coal many times, and it's completely fine. Meg raised an eyebrow, and he suddenly felt a little sorry for that foul-mouthed black crow. Who would have thought that it would become Amy's magic test subject? Furthermore, this was definitely something that Julian had tacitly approved of, so even he couldn't say anything about it. Perhaps this was a part of her lesson. Meg rose to his feet, and stroked Amy's hair with a smile before carrying her to a chair. All right, let's eat first. You have to do well in class today. You don't have to go to class the day after tomorrow, so I'll take you to fly a kite. Really? Father, are you really going to take Amy to fly a kite? The kind that can fly very, very high in the sky? Amy asked with elation. That's right, we're going to fly higher than all of them. Meg nodded with a smile. The autumn weather had been quite refreshing, and the winds had been quite strong for the past 2 days, so many people had taken their children to fly kites in the Aden Square. The day after tomorrow was the restaurant's day off, and Amy didn't have to go to class, so it would be a good idea to take Amy to fly a kite. Yay! Father, you're the best. Amy raised her little fists with elation. Aisha, Mia, have a seat as well. We'll be opening soon. Meg smiled. Amy was just so easily satisfied. He turned and made his way toward the kitchen as he said internally, "System, can I change the prize wheel to a spicy grilled fish recipe? I don't want anything else. All I want now is a spicy grilled fish recipe." Chapter 324. In an elegant yet luxurious study, a dark green letter was reduced to ashes between Josh's slender fingers. He was sitting on a mahogany chair, holding a crystal goblet between his fingers. The amber wine in the goblet was swirling gently, and his usually gentle and refined face was as cold as ice. "Alex, you really didn't die. But where could you be hiding now? Dragon Island? No, those stupid beasts want to kill you more than anyone else. Twilight Forest? That's not right either. Countless orcs died at your hands during the border war. The Wind Forest is also impossible. You are very confident and crazy, but to appear in the Wind Forest with a half-elf daughter is no different from committing suicide." A low murmur sounded in the room, and the paper on the table rose and fell slightly. "If he's not in the Roth Empire, then he's most likely in Chaos City, right? It's a city where all races coexist, so no matter what kind of people appear, they won't stand out. Alex may not be very smart, but he's very alert. He knows which places are dangerous and which are safe. However, it's not easy to find someone who's deliberately hiding in Chaos City." Josh slowly raised the wine goblet in his hand, but just as it was about to reach his mouth, he suddenly stopped and smashed it onto the ground. Amber-colored wine and shards of translucent crystal scattered all over the ground. Josh stood up with a ferocious expression, and clenched his fists as he roared, "You better not let me find you, Alex. So many years have passed, and Irina still hasn't forgotten about you. In that case, I have no choice but to kill you and that little bastard. I was too soft-hearted back then." "Your Highness, are you all right?" The butler's nervous voice sounded from outside the door. Josh's expression instantly returned to normal, and he calmly replied, "I'm fine. Ask Seuss to come over." "Yes," the butler replied, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Josh turned around and pulled out a map from the top row of the bookshelf. He laid it flat on the table, and his brown eyes slowly scanned the map. His brows furrowed as if he was thinking about something. "Your Highness, Seuss is here." Not long after, the butler's voice sounded from outside the door. "Let him in," Josh said without even raising his head. The heavy wooden door was pushed open, and a tall and thin young man with short blonde hair wearing a black magician robe walked in. There was a red scythe embroidered on his chest. This magic caster appeared to be in his 30s, and his complexion was sickly pale. There was a scar running from his glabella to his left eye, and his eyes were a rare light gray, which made him look a little like a dead fish. His entire body was enshrouded in a black magician robe, and gave off a sinister aura. His black leather boots stepped on the crystal shards, creating a cracking sound, but his expression didn't change in the slightest. He looked at Josh with a feverish gaze before lowering his head in a respectful salute. "Seuss pays his respects to your Highness." Joshua shifted his gaze away from the map on the table and said softly, "I want you Azuras to find someone and kill that person." "Your Highness, please give me your orders." Seuss lowered his head and said respectfully. "Meg Alex," Josh replied calmly. Alex. Seuss immediately raised his head and looked at Josh with shock and incredulity in his eyes. Your Highness, didn't Alex die years ago? We've been searching for evidence to prove his death all these years, but there's nothing to prove that he's still alive. Joshua shook his head and looked at Seuss with a serious expression as he said, No, he's still alive. Furthermore, someone has already proven that. Thus, you must find him before everyone else, kill him, and bring his head to me. If Alex is still alive, then I'll definitely kill him to avenge the humiliation I suffered all those years ago. Seuss's expression immediately became sinister, and the scar on his glabella looked like a hideous centipede. Remember, no matter what kind of grudge you had between the two of you, kill him after you find him. If you fail, then bring your head to me, Josh said with a cold expression. Yes. Seuss hurriedly lowered his head in a respectful manner. As the youngest 9th-tier magic caster in the Empire and the leader of Azura, he still felt as if he were treading on thin ice when facing Josh. Not only was he one of the successors to the throne, but it was also most likely because he dared to set up a trap to bring down Alex, who was at the peak of his powers, from the man who had once made him feel the fear of being dominated. He was the man who had once trampled on him, a prodigy who had once been regarded as the most promising magic caster in the Roth Empire. Back then, both of them had reached the 9th tier at the same time, and the so-called pinnacle battle had become his lifelong humiliation. One sword. He had only used one sword strike. And then, he had lost. If it weren't for the unavoidable fear of death in the instant that the tip of the sword pierced through his glabella, he wouldn't even dare to believe that he couldn't even withstand a single sword strike from Alex. Ever since then, the son of the Magus Tower had fallen from the heavens and become a joke. After that, Alex had stepped onto the path of power step by step. He had defeated 10th-tier magic casters and slain giant dragons. The speed at which he was progressing, and his powers were so powerful that no one in the younger generation could hope to catch up to him. Even a so-called prodigy like him could only despair. As such, the Magus Tower lost a magic caster who never missed a single class, and the Knight of Rodu gained a new leader of Azura. The Scythe of Death silently reaped one life after another. Even though I know he's not dead, I can't be sure where he could be right now. However, the most likely place for him to be is perhaps this Chaos City. Josh pointed a finger, and the map on the desk slid toward Seuss. He said in a low voice, Remember, this information has to be kept strictly confidential. Aside from the people of Azura, no one else is to leak this information. Seuss put away the map on the desk and respectfully said, Yes, I'll send someone to Chaos City to gather information right away. Josh was silent for a moment before instructing, Also, when you kill him, kill everyone close to him as well, no matter who they are. Yes. A hint of surprise flashed through Seuss' eyes, but he didn't say anything. You can go now. Josh sat back down in his chair and closed his eyes. Seuss lowered his head and took a couple of steps back before turning to leave. He slowly closed the door of the study. Meg Alex, as expected, many people won't be able to sleep well if you don't die. So, you should just go and die. Josh's voice reverberated throughout the study. Chapter 325. Go on in. I'm sure Simon would like to meet this old friend of mine. The tall Sean directly lifted the curtain and stepped out of the carriage. Although he wasn't wearing any armor, his upright posture and the austere aura he exuded as he walked made it clear that he was a general who had been on the battlefield for many years. The gates of the manor were tightly shut, and Quinn was the only one accompanying Sean. At this moment, everyone was most likely under the impression that the first prince was still commanding the battle on the southwestern border thousands of kilometers away. No one knew when he had returned to Rodu. The door was knocked on, and an old servant opened the door. He was appraising the two people outside with a wary expression. He didn't recognize Sean, but he could tell that he was definitely no ordinary person. "Who are you looking for?" "This is General Simon's manor, right? Just tell him that Sean is here to visit." Sean raised a hand to stop Quinn from speaking, and stepped forward with a hearty smile. "All right, please wait here for a moment. I'll report this to Master right away." The old servant nodded upon hearing this before closing the door. He felt like the name Sean was a little familiar, but he couldn't recall where he had heard it before. However, the fact that Sean had mentioned his master's name indicated that he was most likely a friend of his master's from his time in the army. As such, he couldn't afford to be complacent. "Master, there's a guest outside who calls himself Sean. What do you think?" The old servant went through several courtyards and arrived at the backyard. He saw a bearded man in the garden who was waving a hoe and digging the ground. "Sean." The hoe in Simon's hand suddenly stopped. Sweat flowed down his strong bronze chest, and a look of surprise appeared on his face. "Isn't he a friend of yours?" the old servant asked upon seeing Simon's expression. "I don't dare to be friends with him. Clandon, tell everyone to go to the backyard. No one is to come to the front yard without my permission." Simon strode out of the garden, and casually placed the hoe in his hand on a nearby tree branch. He wiped his sweat with a towel hanging from a nearby tree branch, then patted the dirt off his pants and shoes before making his way out. "Yes, but master, do you want me to serve tea?" the old servant asked again. "They don't like the tea leaves that we picked ourselves," Simon said with a smile, but there was a hint of mockery in his words. The door creaked open, and Sean was appraising the engraved image of a flying griffin on the door with a smile as he said, "Simon, I didn't think that you'd have this kind of craftsmanship. This wood carving is really quite good." "You flatter me, Your Highness." "He's just a useless old soldier who has nothing better to do after returning home," Simon said calmly as he looked at Sean. "Simon, it seems like you still hate me," Sean said as he looked into Simon's eyes. "I wouldn't dare. Simon is just an ordinary person. How would I dare to hate the Crown Prince?" Simon looked into Sean's eyes, his expression as calm as ever. "I wouldn't dare. It's not that I don't hate you. I know that all of you who left the military at the same time hate me. You hate me for not being able to save Alex and avenge him." Sean shook his head with an apologetic look on his face, and sighed as he said, "I can't forgive myself for that, either. If I had received the news earlier, and if I had been more vigilant toward danger, he wouldn't have been trapped and died from exhaustion. The great general always says that people are all going to die." Simon's expression didn't change in the slightest upon hearing Sean's words. He had already heard the same thing on more than one occasion. "Indeed, people are all going to die, and the same goes for you and me." Sean nodded with a forlorn expression, and turned to Simon with a smile as he asked, "What's the matter, Simon? Aren't you going to let me in?" "If the Crown Prince wants to have a seat, then I naturally wouldn't dare to refuse." Simon opened the door completely and stepped aside. Sean looked at the flowers and plants in the courtyard with a smile, and said, "I can't bear to see all of you leave like this, but I have to say that all of you made a good choice. Only after leaving the border can you live such a leisurely life. Even I'm a little envious of you." "Perhaps." Simon looked at the flowers and plants in the courtyard, and clenched his fists. Sean looked around before turning to Simon and said, "Looks like we're the only ones here. My objective for coming here is very simple. I want to ask you something. Please feel free to ask, Your Highness. I'll tell you everything I know." Simon didn't avert his gaze in the slightest. Sean looked into Simon's eyes with a serious expression, and asked, "Where were you on the night of that incident?" Kane was already standing behind Simon, and a cold light flashed through the hand hidden within his sleeve. His eyes narrowed slightly as he stared intently at Simon's back. "I went home to visit my mother's grave." That day was the anniversary of her death, Simon replied in a calm manner, but there was a hint of fury in his eyes. Sean stared into Simon's eyes with his dark brown eyes, as if he were trying to see something different. If I had been beside the great general at the time, I would have been able to take at least 1 or 2 arrows for him. Those shameless bastards deserve to die. Simon roared as he clenched his fists tightly, and a pained look appeared on his face. His hands were trembling slightly, and he seemed to be doing his best to control his own emotions. Indeed, those people deserve to die, and they're all dead now. Sean nodded before withdrawing his gaze from Simon's body. He strode over to a nearby room and gently pushed open the door. There were some completed and semi-completed wooden carvings all over the room, and there was also a pile of untouched wood beside it. Most of the carvings depicted people, such as knights, magic casters, orcs, demons, elves. There were all types of races, and they were all battling and attacking one another. The carvings were extremely lifelike. Sean swept his gaze through the wooden carvings one after another, and made his way all the way to the innermost part of the room. He gently touched the largest griffin carving on the shelf and smiled as he said, "Simon, if His Highness were to know of your abilities, he'd definitely be very fond of you." "His Highness is the one who's obsessed with wooden carvings. I'm just playing around," Simon replied with a shake of his head. Interesting. Sean laughed heartily before turning to leave. As he did so, he said, "Simon, I've always thought that you were an interesting person, but it looks like you're even more interesting than I imagined. However, there's something that you have to listen to: hiding people is different from hiding things. If you don't hide well, you'll die if you're discovered." "I don't understand what you're saying, Your Highness." A hint of surprise flashed through Simon's eyes, but his expression remained unchanged. "Looks like I won't even be able to have a sip of tea today. Farewell." Sean didn't offer any explanation. He exited the room and walked straight toward the gate. When he reached the gate, his footsteps faltered, and he looked at the griffin carving on the gate with a smile as he said, "There seems to be someone missing here." "Farewell, Your Highness." Simon didn't say anything. He bowed in a respectful manner, and looked on as the black horse-drawn carriage departed into the distance. He then turned and entered the gate. The gate slowly closed, and he clenched his fists as he murmured to himself, "Everyone will die, but the general also said that we can't die for no reason." "Your Highness, are we going to go back just like that?" Cain turned around with a perplexed look on his face. Chapter 326. On the western side of the Grand Royal Palace of Rodu, there was a 9-story Magus Tower. The black 9-story Magus Tower was like a giant beast. Only at night would this massive tower glow with silver light, accentuating its status as the tallest tower in Rodu, as well as its status as the holy land of magic casters on the Norland continent. At this moment, on the highest level of the 9-story Magus Tower, there were 10 elderly magic casters sitting around a round redwood table in a circular conference room, conducting the monthly roundtable conference of the Magus Tower. Only the elders of the Magus Tower were allowed to participate in this conference. There was an empty chair in the corner, and it appeared to be a little out of place. An elderly man with white hair and a black beard sat at the head of the table, and said in a weathered voice, "That's pretty much everything for this month. The war in the southwest has been alleviated recently, and there's no need for reinforcements from our Magus Tower for the time being. The evil dragons have also been less active recently, and they haven't caused too much harm to the civilian population, so there's no need to immediately exterminate them." As the Grand Elder of the Magus Tower, Richard had been presiding over the roundtable conference for over 40 years. All the elders nodded. The expressions on their faces were rather relaxed. This meant that in the following period of time, there was no need for these old fellows to personally rush about to deal with the evil dragon. After getting older, not many people were willing to run around, even if they were riding on griffins. I heard that Crassus recently accepted a little disciple in Chaos City, and it's a half-elf little girl. He's been looking for a disciple for several decades. Is he going to give up on himself? Brent was a little obese, and his magus robe was about to burst open. There was a hint of mockery in his voice. That's not necessarily the case. Didn't Julian appear as well? They fought over his disciple, and the two of them ended up taking the same disciple in Chaos City. Oh. Is that so? Those two old guys have been fighting for close to 100 years, and neither of them is willing to concede to the other. Now, they're already half dead, and they're still taking the same disciple? And it's a half-elf little girl. Aren't half-breeds all very lacking in aptitude? Furthermore, their magic is at the extremes of close range and long range. If someone were to learn their magic at the same time, the most likely outcome would be to go insane, right? Everyone started discussing after hearing that. Being able to sit at this round table represented the pinnacle of the magic circle in the Roth Empire. Even if they weren't 10th-tier magic casters, they were at least the cream of the crop among the 9th-tier magic casters. Because of that, they knew a lot more about Crassus and Julian, as well as the battle of ice and fire that was talked about by many in the world of magic. They also knew that the possibility of the two of them accepting the same disciple at the same time was close to zero. If there was a possibility, it would probably be the elven princess who had stunned the entire Norland continent over 10 years ago. The word genius was not enough to describe her. Only such a person could master the ultimate ice and fire magic at the same time, and learn both long-range and melee magic, right? It was a pity that she had turned down Crassus and Julian's request to accept her as a disciple. Instead, she focused on life magic, and became the youngest 10th-tier magic caster on the entire continent at an astonishing speed, crushing all of the other prodigies on the continent. If it weren't for the fact that Meg Alex was too dazzling, that era would have belonged to her. She would have set one record after another that no one in the magic circle would have been able to break, and her name would have been etched in history forever. It's true. Crassus has already asked Arthur to come back, and he's going to move all of his belongings to Chaos City, including his rooms full of gold coins. Looks like he's preparing to retire and teach his disciple in Chaos City. Elliot chuckled and said, Vice President Crassus has always done things according to his wishes. Even if he's accepting a half-orc as his disciple, we shouldn't be surprised, right? Everyone burst into laughter upon hearing that, but there was a hint of mockery in their smiles. That guy still doesn't take our Magus Tower seriously, as always. Richard's expression was rather dark, and his voice was rather low. Countless prodigies had been sent to him over the years for him to choose as his disciple, but none of them had caught his eye. In the end, he went to Chaos City to find a half-elf girl, and now, he couldn't even be bothered to return to the Magus Tower. Instead, he sent a servant to move all of his belongings away. The smiles on everyone's faces faded, and they all wore different expressions, but none of them said anything. Everyone in the Magus Tower was aware of the conflict between Richard and Crassus. It could be said that both of them had played a crucial role in the Magus Tower's current status. In the first 50 years, Crassus had made the Magus Tower receive enough attention from the royal family of the Roth Empire, and that was how the 9-story Magus Tower was built. After Crassus stepped down as president, Richard spent several decades making the Magus Tower an indispensable pillar of the empire. As such, the status of the two of them in the Magus Tower had always been a contentious issue. Even though most of the current Council of Elders had been promoted by Richard, Crassus' prestige in the Magus Tower and in the hearts of the magic casters wasn't inferior to Richard's by much. All of the elderly magic casters sitting around the round table were well aware of that. In that case, as an old friend, Crassus has finally accepted a disciple, so we should congratulate him with some gifts. Richard smiled as he looked at everyone present. His wrinkled finger tapped lightly on the table, and he suddenly stopped. Most of our disciples are already middle-aged, and many of their disciples are already adults. I'll get George to bring some gifts as a token of our Magus Tower's congratulations. That's a good idea. We'll get him to bring our gifts as well. Everyone smiled, but their expressions were a little strange. George Dobson was the proudest disciple of Richard's eldest disciple. He was only 12 years old, but he was already a third-tier magic caster, and it was said that he was already on his way to becoming a fourth-tier magic caster. Although he was still a little inferior to Princess Irina, he was already an outstanding talent among the younger generation. Richard was also very fond of this disciple of his, and often gave him guidance. This was also one of the reasons why he was able to progress so quickly. This time, Richard had sent George to congratulate Crassus on accepting a disciple. In terms of seniority, it wasn't appropriate for him to go there with the intention of humiliating him. Furthermore, he had purposely picked a younger disciple, most likely to stir up trouble. Using a third-generation disciple to defeat a second-generation disciple of Crassus was a great humiliation. Chapter 327. Tell me, how much does a grilled fish recipe cost? I'm a man who can earn over 100 million a year now. Meg wasn't flustered in the slightest as he asked internally. 100,000 gold coins, the system replied in a calm voice. Meg's hand immediately stiffened as he held on to his spoon. System, how much did you say? 100,000 gold coins, the system repeated. Holy fuck. System, are you trying to rob me? You're selling a grilled fish recipe for 10 million gold coins. Will I be able to fly if I eat this grilled fish? Meg couldn't help but roar internally. What kind of fucking price was this? It was simply unacceptable. Host, the recipe is a reward item, so it can't be bought or sold under normal circumstances. If the host wants to force a trade, then the price will naturally be slightly higher than normal, the system replied in a calm voice. Slightly higher. How the fuck is that considered slightly higher? I've been working so hard from dawn to dusk, yet I only earn 500,000 gold coins a day. You're asking for too much. Meg grumbled with a reluctant expression. 50,000 gold coins, that's all I can go. 100,000 gold coins, non-negotiable. The system remained unmoved. Meg began to calculate in his heart. There was no way he could afford 100,000 gold coins right now. Even if he did have 50,000 gold coins, he would have to save them for at least 10 days. Furthermore, it was a little painful to spend so much money on a recipe. If he continued to save up, he would be able to buy a strength point. Alright, then I won't buy it. Rate the spicy grilled fish on the wheel for me. Perhaps I'll get lucky and get it myself. Mag had also regained his composure, and he spoke in an unhurried manner. Do your best, host. There are even more rewarding missions waiting for you. The system's enticing voice sounded. Amy learned the flames of extreme frost today. What magic do you want to learn next? Meg asked as he looked at Amy curiously. Compared to Crassus' melee magic, Julian's magic seemed to be more interesting. Amy shook her head. Master Turtle Shell said that I only need to learn this spell for the next 2 days. In the future, this spell can become many different spells, so this spell is the most important. I see. Meg nodded. Even though he didn't really understand what Amy was saying, Crassus had to have his reasons for saying that. In the field of ice magic, no one on the entire Norland continent was better than him. Ugly Duckling had slipped down from the counter on its own. Although it was a little frightened, it wasn't really hurt. It was already hugging Amy's leg coquettishly, trying to regain her favor. Ugly Duckling, you have to be braver. If you don't even dare to climb up the counter, then that won't do. Look at Big Sister Cece, she can run up and down the wall. You're too weak. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with an exasperated expression. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked at Amy with an aggrieved expression as if it were saying that it was still a baby. Humph, who isn't a baby? I'm not afraid of heights at all. Amy pursed her lips. She didn't buy that at all. Ugly Duckling looked at Amy, and then at the counter. It hesitated for a moment before it turned to face the counter, bent down, and then sped up toward the counter. Splat! Ugly Duckling sped up and slammed its head into the counter. It jumped less than half a meter high, and then slowly slid down the counter with its face pressed against the wall. It looked up at the sky with a look of despair. Sigh, so be it. Looks like you won't be able to become a white swan for the rest of your life. Amy sighed as she withdrew her gaze and continued to eat. Meg couldn't help but shake his head with a smile upon seeing this. It really wasn't going to be easy for Ugly Duckling to become a white swan. Outside the restaurant, the sweet and savory factions had become a lot more harmonious after the issue of the rankings had been resolved. They didn't fight as fiercely as they had in the morning. Due to the effect of the rankings, some customers were also curious about the new faces in the top 30 of the Aiden Square food rankings. They were surprised to see the long line at the entrance of the restaurant, but also a little expectant, so they joined the long line. Although many customers were deterred by the price of the dishes, which were far higher than that of normal restaurants, there were still many customers who ordered the relatively cheaper rujiamo and tofu pudding because of the irresistible aroma. It was exactly because of this that many of the regular customers couldn't eat the limited tofu pudding. There was nothing Meg could do to help. 800 servings of tofu pudding per day was already his limit. If he wanted to provide more, he would have to improve his constitution and cook more efficiently. After a busy lunch, Meg went to the Catering Association's counter under the magic screen and bought 10,000 tickets. It was a little painful to spend so much, but judging from the current situation, he had to ensure that at least one dish made it into the top 30, so he couldn't stop selling tickets for the time being. The next day, the rankings were released, and the braised chicken and rice and rujiamo were still firmly in the 29th and 30th places. However, the tofu pudding, which had originally been in the 99th and 100th places, had already made it into the top 50, taking 47th and 48th places respectively after the sweet and savory factions reached an agreement. A restaurant that had 4 dishes in the top 50 attracted a lot of attention. It had been a long time since such a powerful restaurant had appeared. Shit. It's still in 31st place. Gasp. That bastard. I'm going to avenge him. Ricky clenched his fists tightly as he stared at the rankings with his swollen face. Boss, let's go back first. There seem to be a lot of their people here, the waiter with bruised eyes said in a soft voice. The shop assistant with dark circles under his eyes said softly. Looking left and right at the unfriendly gazes that were directed at him, even his calves were trembling slightly. Let's go. Ricky's expression also changed slightly. He was really scared after the beating he had received the day before. Those people really didn't hold back in the slightest, and if he were to be beaten again, he most likely wouldn't be able to get out of bed. Boss, are we going back? The waiter only dared to raise his voice after they were far away from the crowd. No, we're going to the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. Ricky shook his head as he got into a horse-drawn carriage. He spat, they dared to beat me up, so they have to pay the price. I've already reported what happened yesterday, let's go see what the Chamber of Commerce will give us. Boss Ricky, we're already aware of what happened, and we're currently discussing a specific solution. It's just as you said, you were the one who tried to barge into the restaurant, but the owner of the restaurant opened the door and knocked you flying. After that, you were beaten up by all of the customers. In that case, Mamie's isn't at fault, and you don't even know who the customer who beat you up was. As such, it's clearly unrealistic to think that the Great Temple and the City Lord's Castle can use this incident against Mamie's. In a guest hall of the Aden Chamber of Commerce, Mars looked at the enraged Ricky with a resigned expression. So we were beaten up for nothing. Besides, we paid a guarantee of 30th place, yet our restaurant is only in 31st place because of this restaurant. Isn't the Chamber of Commerce going to give us an explanation? Ricky clenched his fists. Chapter 328. On the leather sofa, Cyril was still toying with the colorful snake as he turned to Mars, and asked, "What did the Catering Association say?" Mars lowered his head slightly, and replied, "Director Stanley said that he's still in the process of verifying the situation, and that he'll inform us of the results." Verification. Is there a need to verify something like that? Looks like Stanley is short on money again, and he's trying to get some money from us. Give him 10 dragon coins and tell him to resolve this matter as soon as possible. Cyril pursed his lips with a cold expression as he said, "This Amy's is clearly up to no good. It's only the second day, and 2 of their dishes have already made it into the top 30, and 4 of their dishes have already made it into the top 50. If things continue like this, more and more people are going to come and complain about it." "All right." Mars nodded before hesitating momentarily, and said, "But second young master, if this restaurant made it onto the rankings board based on its own abilities, then removing it from the rankings board might cause some trouble." True abilities. True abilities are the most worthless thing in this world. Do you think a small restaurant like this can compete with our Aden Chamber of Commerce? Cyril pursed his lips with a disdainful expression as he gently tapped the colorful snake's head with his finger, and said, "Prepare 100 dragon coins. If Stanley can't resolve this issue, then give it to Warren. That old bastard has been taking a lot of money from us over the years, and it's getting harder and harder to feed him." Mars didn't immediately nod. Instead, he turned to Cyril with a question, and asked, "Do we need to ask the president for permission for 100 dragon coins? Do we need to ask the president for permission for 100 dragon coins? It's just a small amount of money. We've already given the Catering Association at least 10,000 dragon coins over the years, right?" Cyril looked up at Mars, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he said in a cold voice, "Cyril, you have to remember who you belong to now. The president is already old, I'm the president from now on." Mars lowered his head in a respectful manner, and replied, "Yes, second young master." How could this be? Could it be that the Aden Chamber of Commerce has been controlling the Aden Square all these years? How could this be? Outside the door, Gloria, who was wearing a black veil hat, took 2 steps back, and looked in the direction of the president's office in disbelief. She had come to see Jeffrey today. She had some thoughts about what she had said at the dinner table, so she wanted to tell Jeffrey face to face. However, she didn't expect to hear the conversation between Cyril and Mars. It was a conversation that was completely beyond her imagination. Although she didn't like her patriarchal grandfather, she had to admit that Jeffrey, who had built up a huge business in Chaos City from scratch in just a few decades, was indeed a legendary figure who could be written into Chaos City's history. The Buffett family's bank was the envy of many people, and the Aden Chamber of Commerce had brought the merchants of Chaos City into the spotlight of the Norland continent. As such, in Gloria's heart, she still had a lot of admiration and respect for Jeffrey. However, after hearing the conversation between Cyril and Mars, she felt as if she could see the darkness beneath the glory of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. This contrast was quite difficult for her to get used to. Cyril suddenly turned toward the door, and asked, "Who's outside?" Gloria panicked as she hurriedly picked up the hem of her dress, and turned to leave. Mars opened the door just in time to see Gloria's profile disappear around the corner. A hint of surprise flashed through his eyes, but his expression remained unchanged. Cyril put down the snake in his hand, and turned to Mars as he asked, "Who's there?" Mars closed the door, and shook his head as he said, "There's no one outside, second young master. Perhaps it's that fat cat again." No, I have to tell Mr. Mac about this. Mamie's food is so delicious, and it has such miraculous effects. It wouldn't be strange if she took the top 5 spot on the rankings board. But now, she's going to be removed from the rankings board because of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. This is so unfair. This isn't something that the Aden Chamber of Commerce should do. Gloria shook her head, and turned to look at the majestic Aden Chamber of Commerce building. She slowly clenched her fists, and a determined look appeared in her eyes as she murmured to herself, "No, the Aden Chamber of Commerce shouldn't be like this. If this is the only way to develop the business under Cyril's leadership, then I'll pick up everything that father left behind." Who said that women have to be inferior to men? Meg didn't care much about the sweet and savory tofu pudding making it into the top 50. After all, his goal was to make one dish into the top 30. During the afternoon break, Mag took a look around Mobai's new blacksmith shop. It was about the same size and layout as the original blacksmith shop, but the exhibition hall at the front was slightly smaller, while the work area at the back was slightly larger. A furnace and a larger blacksmith's table had been added. Lulu, who was topless, was carefully swinging a large hammer under Mobai's guidance. A square piece of red-hot iron on the blacksmith table was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. Every time the hammer fell, there would be a muffled clang, and it seemed to vibrate one's eardrums. Not bad. Today, you just have to forge this piece of iron into thin pieces. Mobai nodded with satisfaction. He also picked up the large hammer and continued hammering the half-finished long sword in front of him. He wasn't going to take on any apprentices in the first place, but even though this big blockhead appeared to be quite simple-minded, he was still quite impressed by his serious and efficient work ethic. Boss Mag's suggestion seemed to be very feasible, but it would definitely take a lot of time to produce a finished product that met his requirements. If he could have more helpers in the shop, then his efficiency would be significantly increased, and he would also be able to squeeze out more time to study the stability of the gunpowder. "Boss Mobai, are we starting work today?" Meg stood outside the door, feeling the warmth in the air. He was a little surprised. He was already very surprised that the dwarven craftsman spent a day and a night rebuilding the blacksmith shop. He didn't expect that Mobai would start working with Lulu so soon after the shop was rebuilt. "Oh, it's Mr. Mac. We have a few orders in a hurry. Of course, we can't stop now that we can start work." Mobai put down the hammer and smiled as he stomped the ground. "And this time, I didn't ask them to dig a tunnel. After this batch of goods is done, let's go to the suburbs and find a place where there is no one to conduct experiments." That's good." Mag nodded with a smile as he appraised the blacksmith's forge. With Mobai's skills and the magic flames of this world, there was a good chance that he would be able to forge steel that met his requirements. When the time came, he would discuss the matter of the steam engine with Mobai, and that shouldn't be an issue. "Okay, I won't disturb your work." Mag withdrew his gaze before turning to leave. He had actually come here to see if Mobai's neighbor was planning to cause any more trouble. After hearing Mobai's words, Mag was immediately relieved. At the very least, he wouldn't have to worry about being blasted into the sky at night. Chapter 329. "Father, are we really going to fly a kite tomorrow?" At night, Amy, who was sitting obediently while Mag blow-dried her hair, looked up expectantly at Mag after she had finished her bath. "That's right. The restaurant isn't open tomorrow, and you don't have to go to school either, so I can take you to fly a kite." Meg nodded with a smile as he ran his fingers through Amy's soft hair, and only turned off the hairdryer after making sure that it was completely dry. "That's great. I love kites, and I really want to fly a kite." Amy leaned back and rolled around on the bed before jumping up and down with joy. However, she quickly stopped with a concerned look on her face as she said, but we don't have a kite at home, so I'm going to have a kite. How are we going to fly a kite tomorrow? Don't worry about that. You'll be able to see a kite when you wake up tomorrow morning. What kind of kite do you want? Meg sat on the bed and patted Amy's head as he looked at Amy with a doting smile. I want a super, super, super big kite. Also, it has to be a purple kite that can fly. It has to be super beautiful. Amy raised her head and pondered seriously. With each request, an expectant smile appeared on her little face, and it was as if she could already envision a purple kite flying into the sky. All right, we'll fly a kite like that tomorrow. Meg agreed with a smile. Amy really did have a lot of requests. However, with the system at hand, these weren't going to be an issue. Really? Father, you're the best. Amy hugged Meg and planted a kiss on his cheek before jumping up and down on the soft bed. Big kite, fly into the sky, big kite, my big kite. Meow, Ugly Duckling also jumped up and down, but the bed was still a little too high for it, so it could only stare at the bottom of the bed. System. Meg said internally as he looked at the lively little girl with a smile in his eyes. No. Meg didn't even get a chance to finish his sentence before the system's resolute voice sounded. Meg raised his eyebrows. This system was getting more and more mischievous. System, I haven't even said what I want to buy, and you're already not selling it. Can't you just be a little more direct? Meg couldn't help but complain. Host, please pay attention to your words. Although this system sells things, there is still a difference between selling things and selling things. After this system study, the word sell in Chinese has many meanings, and it has different meanings in different contexts, the system said solemnly. Then what do you think the word sell meant? Meg raised his eyebrows. The learning system was becoming more and more intelligent. Judging from the host's expression and tone, as well as the context, it seems like you're discriminating against women, the system said seriously. Who said I discriminated against them? They came here to earn money based on their own ability. It's a matter of mutual consent. Why should I discriminate against them? No matter what, they're still better than those fellows who have arms and legs but crawl on the ground with a broken bowl, begging everywhere, Meg also said seriously. That's not the crux of the problem. Judging from the host's answer, the host is indeed treating the system as one of them, the system said seriously. System, that's your subjective assumption. I refuse to accept it. Meg replied calmly. Then, he curled his lips and said, all right, enough with the nonsense. Just tell me how much it would cost to customize a kite like this. Our sales have skyrocketed in the past 2 days. I have plenty of money. The system fell silent. 100 copper coins. The system fell silent. 200. 300. I can't go any higher. With this price, I can find an old craftsman to customize a high-grade kite. Meg still wasn't anxious at all. How about a little more? The system probed after being silent for a long time. 310 copper coins, Meg thought for a moment and said. The kite produced by the system is made of lightweight and high-hardness carbon fiber struts, ultralight carbon fiber umbrella cloth, and high-grade sandalwood reels. The kite string is made of ultra-high-strength fiber rope that can withstand strong winds of force 10. It's the best choice for kite flying during holidays. The system also provides customization services. The host can state his requirements until the design is satisfactory. So? Meg asked with a smile. 310 copper coins isn't even enough to cover the cost of the materials. Don't you want your kite to win at the starting line? Don't you want your kite to surpass all the other kites in the square? Don't you want to be a king and enjoy the envy of others and the adoration of your daughters? If you want, I don't want you for 998, I don't want you for 888, I only want 598, and you can take home a high-grade kite. The system's excited voice sounded. Let's look at the goods first. Meg said calmly. To be honest, he was a little tempted by the system's slogan, especially the phrase, the adoration of your daughters. He almost had the impulse to place an order. Okay. The system replied. Immediately, a series of pictures of kites appeared in Meg's mind. They ranged from ordinary kites to all kinds of strange human-shaped kites. There were Nami, Red Moon Karen, Hancock, and so on. System, otakus obviously wouldn't fly kites. What are you doing? Meg pursed his lips. He felt that he couldn't keep up with the system's thoughts. Don't you want to fly kites? The system retorted. TSK, whether it's in my previous life or this life, I can't be an otaku, okay? Have you ever seen an otaku fly around looking for delicious food every day? Meg said with disdain. But the host has ticked the otaku option in the Weibo customization. This proves that the host still admits that he is an otaku in his heart, the system retorted. I just ticked it for fun. Meg didn't even remember that he had ticked that option. However, he couldn't be bothered to argue with the system about it. After looking through the entire collection, he still couldn't find a kite that met Amy's requirements. As such, he directly said, System, customize one for me according to Amy's requirements. It has to be domineering, and it'll be able to intimidate everyone as soon as it appears. Ding! The system is currently customizing. An image will be ready in 1 minute. Please wait for a moment. The system's voice sounded. Meg was already used to the system's super efficiency. How could he farm in the wind forest if he didn't have some skills? The little girl jumped on the bed for a while. She was already sleepy, so she fell asleep on the bed. Meg got up and carried Amy to her little bed. He then picked up Ugly Duckling and placed it on the bed before tucking the two of them in. A smile also appeared on his face at the sight of the smile on Amy's little face. It appeared that she was very much looking forward to flying a kite tomorrow. Ding! 10 images have been produced. Please choose. The system's voice sounded. Chapter 330. Meg looked at the first rendering in his mind, and discovered that it was a golden purple-striped griffin. Furthermore, Meg was very familiar with this griffin as it was none other than the purple-striped griffin that Meg Alex had used to roam the Norland continent all those years ago. There were 3 purple vertical lines on the golden lion's head, making it look even more domineering. There were also a few purple lines on its powerful wings, which looked like emblems, making the dazzling golden color look even more noble. In Meg Alex's memories, he had encountered this griffin when he was 5 years old. At the time, it was still just a little griffin. After that, they separated for a few years, and when Meg Alex returned to the mountains to find that purple-striped griffin at the age of 15, it still recognized him, and was willing to become his mount. This was the only purple-striped griffin left on the continent, and it was also an extremely powerful 9th-tier magic beast. In all of Meg Alex's epic battles, this purple-striped griffin was always present. Meg sighed with emotion as he looked at this kite. Not only had it inherited Meg Alex's memories, it had also fused with some of his emotional memories. During that battle 3 years ago, the purple-striped griffin had been severely wounded, and he didn't know if it had managed to escape from the 2 9th-tier magic casters. Let's call it the 3rd purple phoenix. Meg's gaze lingered on the purple-striped griffin for a long while. Emotionally, he wanted to choose the purple-striped griffin, but his rationality made him choose the 3rd purple phoenix, which was even more beautiful. The purple-striped griffin was too sensitive, and it would definitely attract a lot of attention if it were to appear. Even though his appearance had changed a lot, if someone were to associate him with Meg Alex, then Amy would be a fatal flaw. Of course, another reason was that Meg felt that Amy would prefer the purple phoenix with its 3 colorful tails. It would also be very beautiful in the sky. Ding! 598 copper coins have been successfully deducted. The kite is being customized, and it will be ready for delivery in 5 minutes. Please confirm the delivery address and delivery time, the system's voice sounded. Just put it on the counter downstairs. Send it out in 5 minutes. I'll take a look at it tomorrow. Meg got up and took out a set of loose clothes from the wardrobe. As he walked out, he had gotten used to practicing his swordsmanship for an hour before going to bed. His control over his swordsmanship had improved. While he was cooking, he was also experimenting with his swordsmanship. While increasing his speed of cutting vegetables, he was also trying to form his own style of swordsmanship. Of course, this so-called sword technique was only a simple variation of the 13 dark shadow forms. However, the advantage was that he could practice it repeatedly while cooking. After mastering it, it would be beneficial for him to connect with other sword techniques. In any case, what he was doing now was to recover and get used to the control of his body, as well as practice the various sword techniques and combat styles in his mind. Father, let's get up and fly a kite. The next morning, Meg was woken up by Amy. As soon as he opened his sleepy eyes, he was greeted by the sight of Amy's expectant smile. His reluctance to be woken up immediately disappeared, and he smiled as he patted Amy's slightly curled hair. He nodded and said, "All right, I'll get up right now to make breakfast for you. After that, we'll go fly a kite." "All right." Amy rubbed her head against Meg's palm and nodded obediently. She then turned to Meg with a curious expression, and asked, "Father, where's our kite? Did you really make a super beautiful kite for me?" "Of course, I've already placed it downstairs. You'll see it when you come downstairs." Meg nodded as he sat up. He looked at the alarm clock beside his bed to find that it was almost 8 a.m. It was rare for him to get such a long nap. Yay! Let's go downstairs, then. Amy was elated as she tugged on Meg's hand and tried to pull him up. "Don't be in such a hurry. We're going out to play today, so we have to dress up." Meg pulled Amy back with a smile. He changed her into a simple and refreshing dress with little purple floral patterns on it, then braided her hair into 2 intricate braids. After that, he tied her hair into 2 hairbands with little purple floral patterns on them, and she looked like a beautiful little girl. "I'm going to see the big kite that Father prepared for me." Amy carried Ugly Duckling downstairs with an expectant look on her little face. She should like it, right? Meg slowly followed along behind her, but he was also a little nervous. After Amy made her way downstairs, she suddenly fell silent. Meg thought that she didn't like the kite after seeing it, so he quickened his pace. In any case, it would only take him 5 minutes to customize a kite from the system, so if Amy didn't like it, then he could just make a new one. However, as soon as Meg turned the corner, he was greeted by the sight of Amy looking up at the purple phoenix kite on the counter with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Her little mouth was slightly agape, and her bright blue eyes were wide open as if she had seen something incredible. Meg stroked Amy's hair with a smile as he made his way over to her, and asked, "Do you like it?" Yes, I love it." Amy nodded enthusiastically as she looked up at Meg with elation in her eyes. "Father is so awesome. You made such a beautiful kite for Amy. It's even more beautiful than all of the kites that Amy has ever seen. All of the other children are going to be very envious of you. Of course, Father is omnipotent." Meg nodded with a content smile at the sight of Amy's smile. Shameless. A thought flashed through Meg's mind, but Meg ignored it. But what kind of bird is this? It's so beautiful with purple feathers and a long rainbow tail. Amy reached out to touch the long tail with a curious expression. Ugly Duckling also reached out to touch it with its little paw. "This is a phoenix. I don't think it exists in this world. It's a legendary mythological beast. Meg smiled as he spoke. In his memory, there were indeed similar magical beasts in this world, but there were no phoenixes. Phoenix. A purple phoenix. It's so beautiful. If only I could have one. Then I'd be able to fly into the sky on it, Amy said with an expectant look in her eyes. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked up at Amy with a panicked expression as it waved its little paws through the air, as if it were trying to mimic a flying pose in an attempt to make its presence felt. Ugly Duckling, you don't even dare to climb onto a cabinet, so you definitely don't dare to fly. Besides, you don't even have wings, so there's no way you can fly. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with a disdainful expression as she shook her head. Chapter 331. I'll go make breakfast for you too, you can play for a while. Meg smiled as he made his way toward the kitchen. Ugly Duckling's fear of heights was very interesting. However, it didn't look like it could fly, so there was no need to pay it any mind. Occasionally, some customers would pass by the restaurant, but they could only depart in disappointment upon seeing the closed sign hanging on the door. The customers had already figured out Mag's temper. Although Boss Mag was easy to talk to and treated people kindly, as long as it was the restaurant's rules, he would follow them. No matter who you were, if you didn't follow the rules, Boss Mag would have a blacklist that would make people tremble in fear. After a simple breakfast, it was already 9 a.m. However, the sun was just right, so it was the perfect time to fly a kite. Let's go. It's time to fly a kite. Amy jumped out of the restaurant first, and Ugly Duckling followed behind her. Meg also exited the restaurant with the kite in his hand. Excluding the 3 colorful tails, the kite was almost as tall as a grown man. Its vibrant purple color was interspersed with some bright silver, and it looked as if it were made of real feathers. The kite was very big, but it was very light in the hand, as if it were weightless. The thin poles were extremely sturdy, and it felt as if the kite would fly into the sky if you were to throw it. Meg was very pleased with the texture of the kite, and he almost couldn't help but praise the system. Of course, there was no such thing as praise. If he were to praise the kite, the system would most likely fly into the sky. Wow, what a beautiful kite! Little Amy, are you going to fly a kite with Mr. Mac? Cece was feeding black coal and green pea at the entrance of the magic potion shop, and her eyes lit up at the sight of the huge kite in Meg's hand. That's right, that's a kite made by Father. Big Sister Cece, do you want to fly a kite with us? Amy asked proudly as she extended an invitation to Cece. I really want to fly a kite, but Big Sister Cece still has work to do, so I won't be able to fly a kite with little Amy today. Have fun with Father. Cece looked at the magic potion shop with a smile and shook her head. All right. Amy nodded before turning to black coal and green pea with a smile. Green pea, black coal, do you want to come with us? No. Charcoal refused decisively, looking at Amy with a frightened gaze. I don't want to go either. Green pea shook its head and combed its soft green fur with its red mouth. I can fly, so I don't like to fly a kite. Don't worry, black coal, I won't use you to test my flames of extreme frost next time, Amy consoled black coal. However, before black coal had a chance to heave a sigh of relief, she continued with a serious expression, at the very least, I'll wait until Master Turtle teaches me my second spell. Young mistress, this highness. No, this lowly one was wrong. Please be magnanimous and forgive this lowly one. In the future, I will do whatever you say. Please don't freeze me with that ice again. It's too cold. Black Coal's voice was filled with indignation as he looked at Amy with tears in his little black eyes. All right, seeing as you're so pitiful, I won't freeze you next time. Amy looked at Black Coal and nodded after a brief moment of contemplation. Thank you, little mistress. I'll be your most loyal servant from now on. Please let me know if you need anything. Black Coal was ecstatic, and his voice trembled slightly. Then Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling, which was staring at a butterfly on the ground and preparing to pounce on it. Meow! Ugly Duckling seemed to have sensed Amy's gaze, and its body immediately stiffened as it shook its head vigorously. It had also experienced the horror of being dominated by ice the night before. What you're doing is wrong. Who should I use to test my magic? Amy pursed her lips with a hint of frustration. Amy, it's also wrong to use Ugly Duckling and Black Coal as test subjects. No matter what we do, we have to consider the feelings of others. If they're our friends, we shouldn't force them to do things against their will. Meg looked at Amy with a serious expression. Is that so? Amy looked up at Meg with a confused and conflicted expression. Meg nodded in a gentle voice, and said, yes. Ugly Duckling doesn't like it when you freeze it with your magic, so it's scared. This is a bad emotion, and it means that it's not happy. We should make our friends happy, just like how you want Jessica to be happy. At Amy's age, she would often do things according to her own preferences, so she needed to be guided by her father. Just like how you treat Jessica. Amy's eyes gradually lit up as she looked at Meg with an earnest expression, and said, I understand, father. Good girl. A smile also appeared on Meg's face. Ugly Duckling, I won't use my flames of extreme frost to freeze you anymore. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling with a smile. Meow! Ugly Duckling cried with elation as it rubbed its head against Amy's calf with elation. But Jessica never wants me to carry her, so I won't carry you in the future. You're not a little kid anymore, so you have to learn how to walk on your own, Amy continued with a serious expression. Meow! Ugly Duckling's elation immediately disappeared as it looked up at Amy and raised its two little white front paws as if asking for a hug. No, father said that I have to treat you like how I treat Jessica. I can carry you, but I can't carry Jessica. That's not fair to her. Amy shook her head in refusal before waving goodbye to Cece and skipping toward the plaza. There were already many kites competing in the sky at the center of the plaza. Ugly Duckling immediately turned to look at Meg and reluctantly changed its target. I already have a lot of things in my hands, so you can walk on your own. Meg shrugged as he carried the kite in one hand and the kite reel in the other, and followed after Amy. He couldn't spoil Amy too much. Otherwise, it would be too tiring to carry her when she grew fat. Meow! Ugly Duckling cried with an aggrieved expression as it trotted behind the two of them. Even though it appeared to be a little strenuous, it was still able to keep up. In the plaza, many parents were flying kites with their children. There was a massive circular plaza at the center of the Aiden Square, and the ground was paved with bluestone, making it ideal for kite flying. When the children gathered together, they would naturally compare whose kites looked better, and whose father's kite flew higher. Chapter 332. There were dozens of kites flying in the sky. Most of them were small, diamond-shaped kites that flew 3 to 4 meters in the air. Those that could fly 5 to 6 meters were already considered the cream of the crop. Among them, there was a large black kite that flew nearly 10 meters in the air. It was particularly eye-catching. Yaya, be careful. Father will fly the kite higher. Daniel also had a proud smile on his face. He could feel the envious gazes from all around him, and even his footsteps became light. He ran a few steps and released the long string in his hand. The large black kite that was over 1 meter in length flew a few more meters in the air. It had already left all the other kites in the dust. It was the only one that stood out. This time, I have to rebuild the great image that I lost in Yaya's heart. Daniel thought to himself. Some time ago, when he brought Yaya out to play, he didn't expect to meet a little girl with exquisite braids. The little girl insisted on tying a braid, and it took him an entire day to appease her. This time, it took him many days to make the kite. He specially went to find a fishing net string, and indeed, the kite was flown high and stable. He took all the limelight and also enjoyed the adoring gazes of his daughter. "Wow, that black kite is flying so high. Father, run. I want my kite to fly as high as his, even higher than his. Father, why is our kite so small? Look at that kite, it's so big and so high. I want a kite that big too. Boo-hoo, I want it. I want a kite that big. I want it, I want it." The children were all envious of the kite that was flying high. Many of them had already started to make a fuss. Okay, I'll run now. Father will bring you to buy one later. Don't cry, don't cry. The parents looked at the black kite that stood out from the rest and felt helpless. There was also a nameless fire burning in their hearts. If everyone was flying small kites, there wouldn't be so much trouble. Now, it was a big problem for them to appease their little ancestor. Hearing those voices, Daniel's smile became even more radiant. Yes, that's the feeling. He was their parent now. He should let them feel what he felt back then. Wow! Father, look! That black kite is so awesome. It's flying so high. It's higher than all the other kites. Amy ran to the square and looked up at the kite flying in the sky. Then she turned to look at Meg and asked excitedly and expectantly, "Can our kite fly higher than that?" When Daniel heard the voice, he instinctively turned around to take a look. When he saw Amy, his eyes widened. Wasn't this the young lady with the pretty pigtails from last time? A sense of foreboding welled up in his heart, and his gaze then fell on the purple kite in Meg's hand, which was around the height of a grown man, and he immediately stopped in his tracks. My God! How could a kite be made so beautifully? Moreover, he made it so big. And, why is it him again? Why is it this father and daughter pair again? Daniel looked at Meg, and suddenly began to doubt his life. Was he going to be attacked again this time? Father, our kite is going to fall. Why aren't you running anymore? Yaya looked up at the kite in the sky with a concerned expression before turning to Daniel with a perplexed expression. Oh, I'll run right away. Daniel looked up to see that the kite was indeed going to fall after losing all of its power. He hurriedly picked up his pace, and the kite regained its power and rose a little higher into the sky. Maybe it's just something that looks good but is useless. So what if it's made to look good? If it can't fly, then it'll be embarrassing, Daniel thought to himself. How could a person do everything well? He didn't believe that such a person existed. Wow, Mother, look at that uncle's kite. It's so beautiful. It's even bigger than the black kite. Yeah, what a beautiful purple kite. Only that kid's kite is purple. Father, I want one too. Such a big kite must be able to fly very high, right? It's even higher than the black kite. I'm so envious. The children also quickly noticed the kite in Meg's hands. They all looked at Amy with envy and began to pressure their parents. All of the parents looked at the kite in Meg's hands, and their expressions became even more dejected. Even if Daniel's kite defeated everyone in terms of height, at least his kite was ugly. That way, they could still console their children with their good looks. But now, such a big kite had appeared. Looking at the small kites in their hands, the difference was like heaven and earth. It's best if it can't even fly a meter. All of the parents prayed in their hearts. If it was good-looking and could fly high, then it would be too unreasonable. They probably wouldn't be able to go home in peace today. Of course it can. Moreover, it can fly even higher and better. Meg looked up at the big black kite in the sky. It was more than 10 meters high. In his previous life, he could easily fly it with a normal kite, let alone with the custom-made big kite provided by the system. If this couldn't even surpass that crude kite, then it would be a waste of the good equipment the system had given him. Moreover, he could also sense the unfriendly gazes of the other parents. Regarding this, he could only express that there was nothing he could do. Besides, compared to whether the other children were happy or not, of course, Amy's happiness was more important. As for how the other parents would console their children later, that was not something he needed to worry about. Okay. Let's quickly fly the big kite up there. It must be higher than the other children's kites. Amy clapped her little hands happily. Feeling the envious gazes of the other children, she was also very happy. Her father was the best, and the other children were all very envious of him. Then, Amy, help hold the kite. We're going to fly. Meg handed a corner of the big kite to Amy and asked her to hold it gently. He first released a few meters of string to sense the direction of the wind. He then turned to Amy with a smile and said, 1, 2, 3, let's go. She quickly ran 2 steps forward, and the kite flew against the wind. Let's go. Amy yelled joyfully. She also started running behind Meg. Looking up at the rising purple phoenix kite, her eyes became brighter and brighter, and a happy smile spread across her face. The big kite is flying. It's so beautiful. Almost all of the children in the plaza were looking at the rising kite. All of their mouths were agape, and their eyes were filled with envy. Chapter 333. F. Fuck. Is there any justice in this world? Daniel looked on as the purple kite rose into the air, and it overtook all of the other kites that were around 5 meters tall in the blink of an eye before continuing to soar upward in a straight line. He could only look on as the purple kite overtook his own large kite and continued to soar upward, as if it were going to fly all the way into the sky. So awesome, all of the children raised their heads with their mouths gaped open. If it could be said that they had wanted their father to overtake the black kite in the past, then looking at the purple kite that was flying higher and higher in the sky now, their little hearts had been completely won over, and they couldn't even muster up any thoughts of overtaking it. Wah, father, our kite has been overtaken. It's no longer the tallest one. This kite is prettier and bigger than ours, and it's flying higher than ours. We're not that awesome anymore. Yaya pouted as she looked at the purple phoenix kite, and she began to sob uncontrollably. She had been quite happy just a moment ago, but her expression had completely changed. Don't cry, Yaya. Look at father. Run a little faster, and you'll definitely be able to fly even higher. Daniel immediately began to panic as he consoled Yaya, and he began to run even faster. He continued to release the fishing line in his hand, and the black kite also continued to soar upward in hot pursuit of the purple kite. All of a sudden, it looked as if they were going to compete with one another. I believe in father. You can do it, father. Yaya stopped sobbing and clenched her little fists as she offered words of encouragement to Daniel. Father, you can do it. Fly even higher. Fly even higher. Amy also yelled with elation as she ran behind Meg. Even though she wasn't doing it on purpose, there was still a sense of competition between her and her children, so she naturally wasn't going to concede defeat. All right. Meg took a glance at Dennis, and he felt like this man was a little familiar. His gaze then fell on the little girl with a bun on her head, and he immediately recalled who she was. Wasn't this the little girl who had cried because of Amy's hair last time? Meg suddenly felt a little embarrassed as he looked at Daniel, who was sweating profusely as he ran in front of him and glared at him with hostility from time to time. He had already hurt him once before, and it seemed like he wouldn't be able to escape this time. As for losing, Mag didn't even think about it. After all, his daughter was still cheering him on from behind. At a time like this, it was only right for him to fight for first place. After all, he was a father, and there was no way he was going to let someone else win. Although I was hurt by Black Kite earlier, I still hope that Black Kite can win. If Purple Kite wins, we'll be in trouble. That's right. That purple kite is too beautiful. I wonder if he made it himself or bought it. If he bought it, then it's fine. If he made it himself, then there's really nothing we can do. All of the parents were looking at the two kites nervously. Although they weren't competing, this was a matter of what kind of pain and suffering they were going to experience. Where were they going to get a kite that was so big, beautiful, and could fly so high? Wow, look! That kite is so beautiful, and it's flying so high. I thought it was a beautiful bird that had just taken flight from the Aden Square. That black kite is a little ugly, but it's also flying quite high. It looks like the two kites are competing. The two kites continued to fly higher and higher, and they attracted the attention of many people outside the square. Kites made by hand were generally quite good if they could fly 3 to 5 meters high. Kites made by experienced craftsmen could fly even higher, but due to various factors such as the materials used, not many kites were able to fly above 10 meters. Currently, the two kites were already over 10 meters tall, and they were still continuing to ascend. It was as if they were in a competition, but at the same time, a sense of anticipation welled up in everyone's hearts. Everyone wanted to see which kite would be able to fly higher, and many people stopped to look on. Dennis's fighting spirit soared as he sensed everyone's attention on him. He had poured a lot of energy into this kite, and he also wanted to rebuild his image in Yaya's heart. As such, he definitely couldn't give up so easily. He was already running as fast as he could, and the string in his hand was about to run out. In contrast to Dennis, who was sprinting across the square, Meg appeared to be a lot more graceful. Aside from a few quick steps during the takeoff, he only had to gently tug on the string according to the direction of the wind, and the purple phoenix rose into the air in an elegant manner. Wow, Father is so awesome. Our purple phoenix is so awesome. Fly higher. Fly higher. Amy raised her head and clapped her little hands with excitement on her face. This was the first time she had flown a kite. In the past, she had always been very envious when she saw other children flying kites with their parents. Now, she was also flying a kite with her father, and it was such a beautiful kite. It was even bigger and higher than everyone else's kites. Oh, and there was also a large black kite persevering in the sky. It was almost as tall as the purple phoenix, and this made Amy a little nervous. That black kite also looked very powerful. Go, Father. Go, Father. Yaya clapped her little hands together and yelled as she looked on with a nervous expression at the sight of the black kite chasing after the purple kite. It seems to be quite powerful, but if this is all you've got, then I'm afraid it won't be enough. Meg looked at the large black kite, and a gust of wind just so happened to blow past. He loosened the string in his hand, and the purple phoenix rose into the air before quickly leaving the black kite far behind. The string continued to spin at high speed, 15 meters, 20 meters, 25 meters. There seemed to be no upper limit. How? How is this possible? Dennis looked on with incredulity at the sight of the purple kite that had left him in the dust by over 10 meters in the blink of an eye. Whoosh! Right at this moment, the string in Dennis's hand suddenly snapped down the middle, and the large black kite plummeted from the sky like a bird with broken wings before landing in a nearby bush. Dennis stared blankly at the broken string in his hand, and a series of forlorn sighs rang out across the square. Our kite flew the highest. Father is the best. Amy yelled with elation as she ran over and latched onto Meg's leg. Meg drew back the string and scooped Amy into his arms with a smile on his face. The little girl's smile and expression of reverence made him feel very satisfied. The purple phoenix soared through the sky by itself, and it really did appear to be invincible and lonely. Wah! Our kite broke, and it's not the highest anymore. It can't fly anymore. Yaya was stunned for a moment before bursting into tears. Yaya, don't cry. Don't cry. Father will reconnect the kite string in a while. That way, you can fly up into the sky again. Later, you will be able to fly even higher. Dennis said as he hurriedly wiped away Yaya's tears. Chapter 334. Whoa! Dennis's expression stiffened upon hearing this. He had initially thought that he would be able to gloss over this matter, but Yaya's attention was still focused on the beautiful big kite. I want that kite too. I want a big kite too. The big kite is so fun, but the small kite isn't fun at all. I want one too. Father, didn't you say that our kite could fly as high as it could fly? But it's not flying high at all now. Wah, you liar. Not only Yaya, but all of the other children also began to throw a tantrum as soon as the competition between the two kites concluded. The purple kite in the sky was completely different from the other kites that were flying around 3 to 5 meters high. This direct difference made them choose to use the most direct method to pressure their parents. Don't cry, Father will make you a bigger and prettier one when we get back. Good girl, good girl. I'm going to ask that uncle where he bought his kite, and we'll go buy one too. All of the parents consoled their children as they turned to look at Meg with resentment in their eyes. This guy was here to mess things up. Now that they had seen someone else's kite fly so high, none of the children were able to sit still anymore. Father, why are they crying? Amy looked at all of the crying children with a perplexed expression. It's probably because their kites aren't flying high enough, so they want to play with our kites. Meg shrugged as he held onto Amy with one arm and tugged on the kite string in his other hand. The purple phoenix did a somersault in the sky, and its colorful tail fluttered through the air in a spectacular display. Wow! That's awesome! All of the children immediately let loose cries of surprise before becoming even more rowdy. Don't cry, I know that my father's kite is super beautiful and can fly very high, so if you want to play with it. Amy looked at the children with serious expressions as she consoled them, you can watch me play with it. All of the children who had already stopped crying and were listening intently to Amy's words immediately burst into even louder sobs. I want to play with it too. I want to play with my own kite. Other children all have such beautiful kites, why don't I have one? Woo woo. Meg raised an eyebrow. Amy was really a child killer. She was even more lethal than he was. But there didn't seem to be anything wrong with what she said. Father, why are they crying even harder? Didn't I allow them to watch me play? Amy asked as she looked at Meg with even more confusion. Back when she didn't have a kite to play with, she felt extremely happy just watching others play with it. Because people are possessive and want better things. When they see a better kite, they want to take it for themselves. However, the kite doesn't belong to them, so they can only cry. Meg said with a smile. Possessiveness was a natural instinct. Meg didn't have any derogatory words, but that was the truth. These children might have cried because of the father and daughter, but in the end, it was because of themselves or their parents. Take the little elf girl beside them for example. Although she was a little envious, she stood obediently by her father's side and didn't cry or make a fuss. I see. Then when Meg is done playing with the kite, let's let them play with it for a while. That way, they won't cry anymore, right? Amy nodded thoughtfully as she turned to Meg. If Amy is willing, then that's fine too. Meg nodded with a smile. He was very willing to protect Amy's goodwill. Then can I fly the kite for a while? Amy looked up at the kite flying several dozen meters in the air with anticipation in her eyes. Of course you can. Use this hand to grab the string and pull gently. Father will carry you as we run. That way, the kite will continue to fly even higher. Meg handed the string in his hand to Amy and ignored the other children. They had specially come to fly the kite today, so they had to grab the string with their right hand. Such a big kite would require a lot of force on the string, so it was very easy for Amy to get hurt if she were to grab it by herself. Let go of the string when I say let go. Meg instructed with a smile. He quickly ran against the wind with Amy in his arms while instructing Amy to release the string. The string spun quickly, and the purple phoenix flew higher and higher in the air. This is so fun. Flying a kite is so fun. Amy's tinkling laughter reverberated throughout the plaza. Ugly Duckling was skipping along behind the two of them, occasionally looking up at the kite and waving its little paws in the air. No one knew if it was trying to fly or catch the kite. The children looked on enviously as they raised their heads. They slowly stopped crying and looked at it seriously. Their minds were filled with thoughts of how high the kite could fly. Only then did all of the parents heave a sigh of relief. This child would never stop crying, especially when he was making a fuss about something. Unless they could find something more interesting to distract him, there was no way to appease him. Who would have thought that they would stop crying on their own? Dennis looked at Meg with a hint of resentment in his eyes. He had come prepared this time, but he didn't think that Meg would still beat him in the end. Even though Yaya had stopped crying, he still felt a little uncomfortable at the sight of the envious expression on her face, and he narrowed his eyes at Meg. Meg played with Amy for a long while. He didn't fly kites often in his past life, but he had flown competition-level kites with his friends. The kite provided by the system had already surpassed that level. If he wanted to fly it, he could easily fly at 100 meters or even 200 meters. However, it would be too troublesome to bring it back down if he flew it so high. As such, Meg only flew it to an altitude of around 30 meters. That way, it would be easier to fly, and it would be more interesting to show off. Alright, let's rest for a while and drink some water. Meg placed Amy on the ground and took out a small thermos flask from the small bag at his waist. He poured a cup of water and handed it to Amy. He then took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat off her forehead. Aha! Amy took the cup with both hands with a blissful smile on her face. She really had a lot of fun flying kites today. Bro, can I have a word with you? Dennis walked up and looked at Meg with a serious expression. Meg looked at Dennis and asked, a little puzzled, what's the matter? Dennis should be a swordsman, but Meg didn't sense any hostility from him, so he didn't appear too nervous. Chapter 335. Well, I'm not selling it. Meg shook his head as he looked at Denise with a bitter smile, and said, but if you want to play with it, then I'll let you play with it for a while. We're almost done playing anyway. Yeah, little girl, I'll let you play with it for a while. I've already had enough. Amy finished all of the water in her little cup before waving at Yaya. Big sister, can you really let me play with it for a while? Yaya looked at Amy with an incredulous expression. Of course you can, but the kite is still mine, so I'm just lending it to you. Amy nodded with an earnest expression. Alright, thank you, big sister. Yaya yelled with elation before spreading open her little arms toward Denise, and saying, Father, I want to be hugged and fly a nice kite. Alright, Father will pick you up right away. Denise bent over to pick Yaya up before turning to Meg with a grateful expression, and saying, Thank you so much, brother. Children's happiness is the most important thing. Meg smiled as he handed the reel in his hand to Denise. He also felt very touched at the sight of Amy's smile. Meg played with Amy and Ugly Duckling in the plaza for the entire morning. Even though most of the kite was given to the other children to play with, Amy and the other children also had a lot of fun. The laughter of the children filled the entire plaza, and smiles also appeared on the faces of the parents. He really is a good person. Even though he made the children cry, he's making them laugh now. That's right, that child is also very generous. If it were my child, I wouldn't even let anyone touch it. All of the parents who were familiar with each other conversed in low voices as they looked at Meg with smiles on their faces. All right, it's time to go back for lunch. At noon, Meg took back the kite with a smile. After all, it was a $598 kite, so he was not so generous as to give it to the other kids. After Amy waved goodbye to all the new friends she had made today, he led her back to the restaurant. Meg took a look at the rankings as he passed by the magic screen. The braised chicken and rice and Ruggiamo were still at the top of the list, ranking 29th and 30th respectively. The sweet and savory tofu pudding continued to climb up the list, ranking 43rd and 44th respectively. If we close today, our ranking will definitely drop. If we want to remain in the top 30, we'll have to increase the supply of braised chicken and rice and Ruggiamo starting tomorrow. Ruggiamo is already at its limit, but we can add a casserole for braised chicken and rice. Meg retracted his gaze from the ranking list. After all, his goal was only to have one dish enter the top 30. During this period, it was not a bad idea to provide the dish that needed to enter the ranking list. After closing for a day, Mimi Restaurant's ranking on the rankings board did indeed drop. The braised chicken and rice and Ruggiamo both dropped to 38th and 39th place, respectively, while the other three dishes also dropped in their rankings. 29th. Boss, our restaurant is finally in 29th place. An excited voice sounded from the crowd, and the employee turned to Ricky with an elated expression. 29th. It really is 29th. The 29th place that I've always dreamed of. Ha ha ha. That Mimi's really is gone. They must have found out that she was cheating the rankings list, and she was removed from the rankings list. Ricky threw his head back and roared with laughter. Due to his exaggerated expression, the wounds on his face were pulled, and he grimaced in pain, but he was still unable to hide the excitement on his face. TCH, that's Mr. Mac's fault for taking a day off every 6 days. Otherwise, do you think you'd have a chance to enter the top 30? Exactly, Mimi's hasn't been removed from the rankings list. She's still in 38th and 39th place, and she's definitely going to surpass you tomorrow. Harrison and George pursed their lips as they turned to leave. How? How is that possible? The smile on Ricky's face immediately stiffened, and he turned to look at the 38th and 39th places on the second magic screen with an incredulous look on his face. He had thought that with the power of the Chamber of Commerce, this restaurant would definitely be removed from the rankings list, but who would have thought that the restaurant would only fall because it was closed for a day? Unless the owner of a restaurant with such good business is retarded, there's no way that he would close for no reason. Those two guys just now must have been lying to me. They must have run out of money to cheat the rankings list, and that's why their rankings fell. Ricky consoled himself, and only after a long while did he withdraw his gaze from the rankings list. Seeing as I've already fallen, there's no way I'm going to get back up again. Let's see how you're going to surpass me this time. Meg had already anticipated that his restaurant would fall from the rankings list, so when Yabamiya informed him of his ranking in the morning, he was a little surprised that his restaurant hadn't fallen out of the top 40. After that, he swindled a large clay pot from the system and prepared to make 3 pots. I can't give up on the Haagen-Dazs set meal, but the prize mission will be completed 2 days early, so I'm looking forward to what I'll get. A hopeful smile appeared on Meg's face as he looked at the countdown timer in his mind. Just as Mag had expected, with the addition of the clay pot, the braised chicken and rice's supply had increased by close to a third. As such, on the third day, the braised chicken and rice managed to squeeze into 29th place, overtaking Ricky's rotisserie, and dropping it to 30th place. Rigiamo's ranking was also steadily climbing up to 32nd place, and it was only a matter of time before it returned to the top 30. In contrast, Ricky's rotisserie was a little pitiful at 30th place, and many people were already speculating whether it would be removed from the rankings list one day. Arf! I'm so mad. My rotisserie has been removed from the rankings again. The Chamber of Commerce has to give me an explanation this time. Ricky's face was flushed red as he stood in the reception area of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. My apologies, Mr. Ricky, but the Secretary General of the Mars Chamber of Commerce is very busy today, so he doesn't have time to greet you. He told me to tell you not to worry, the rankings list hasn't been finalized yet, and the Chamber of Commerce will never disappoint any of its members, a worker said with a professional smile. Ricky opened his mouth to say something, but after thinking about it, he obediently closed his mouth. He nodded and said, "All right, I'm sure the Chamber of Commerce will uphold justice for us." Chapter 336. Of course. Meg replied without any hesitation. He had been looking forward to this wheel for a long time. During the past 2 days, Amy had asked him several times when she would be able to eat super delicious grilled fish, but he could only give her a vague answer. Whether or not he could let Amy eat delicious grilled fish depended on this wheel. As soon as Meg's voice trailed off, a large wheel with 7 equal portions appeared in his mind. On it were the following words: strength +0. 5. Premium red wine brewing method, secret black pepper steak recipe. Thank you for your participation, spicy grilled fish recipe. To Meg, the most attractive prize was naturally the strength +0. 5. After all, it could directly increase his strength and combat prowess. However, what he wanted the most right now was still the spicy grilled fish recipe. Grilled fish was one of his favorite foods, and every time he went to Sichuan or Chongqing, he would go to the most authentic grilled fish restaurant to eat grilled fish. The spicier, the better. Amy wanted to eat grilled fish, so grilled fish was naturally the best choice. Of course, Meg also didn't refuse any of the dishes that were delicious, such as pickled fish, sweet and sour fish, steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers, and so on. However, it was generally very difficult to come across any dishes that were delicious. There was a one in the center of the wheel, which most likely represented one chance. Meg glanced at Amy, who was lying on the counter with her eyes closed and was about to fall asleep. He hesitated momentarily before quickly making his way over to Amy. He gently carried her upstairs with a smile as he said, "Amy, you can't fall asleep before you wash up. You have to be very clean before you can sleep." After washing up Amy and tucking the 2 little ones in, Meg leaned over and gently planted a kiss on Amy's forehead before lying down on his bed. He looked at the wheel in his mind with a serious expression as he asked, "System, are you sure you can't remove the 'thank you for your participation' option?" Host, adding a blank option to any game related to probability will make the game more interesting and exciting. In order to make the host's path to becoming the god of cookery more interesting, the system insists on leaving the thank you option. At the same time, I guarantee the fairness of this lucky draw with integrity, the system said solemnly. Can we change the guarantee to something else? Meg raised his eyebrows. When he heard the system using moral integrity as a guarantee, he suddenly panicked. Host, please don't doubt the integrity of this system. The system's voice raised a few notches. Is there a need to doubt it? Meg pursed his lips. Host, please rest assured that this system will not participate in this lucky draw event. If the host does not trust this system, you can directly use the physical wheel to participate in the lucky draw. The system chose to compromise. Right, I almost forgot that I bought a physical roulette last time. Meg's eyes lit up. This lucky draw opportunity was not easy to come by. In order to prevent the system from deliberately changing the results of the draw to a "thank you for your patronage," he felt that no matter how careful he was, it would not be too much. In the room next door, Meg dragged out the large roulette wheel that he had bought from the system. It was identical to the one in his mind, and it was also split into 7 sections, each of which had different options written on it. Host, you only have one chance. You won't be able to try it out, and you won't be able to try it again. Regardless of the result, it will be your reward for completing this mission. I wish you good luck, the system's serious voice sounded. All right. Meg looked at the large roulette wheel, and felt his heart rate accelerate. He took a deep breath, then gripped the edge of the roulette wheel and spun it forcefully. The roulette wheel spun rapidly, and the needle on the wheel made a series of clicking sounds. Meg stared at the needle with an unblinking gaze. The roulette wheel gradually slowed down, and one option after another passed by the needle. When it reached the "thank you for your patronage" section, it was almost about to stop. Meg felt his heart skip a beat. If it stopped here, that would be awkward. However, in the final instant before it stopped, the roulette wheel swayed slightly, and still moved a small half section to the left. Spicy grilled fish. Meg blurted out before quickly covering his mouth. He glanced in the direction of the other room with unconcealable joy in his eyes. Congratulations, host. You have won a spicy grilled fish recipe. The prize has been issued, and host can enter the test field for the god of cookery to study at any time. The system's voice sounded with a hint of disappointment. System, are you trying to get me to "thank you for your patronage" section? Meg pursed his lips as he looked at the grilled fish experience bag that had appeared in his mind. He was in a good mood. Host, please do not doubt the fairness of the system replied in a serious voice. All right, I'm in a good mood today, so I won't bicker with you. Meg placed the roulette wheel against the wall before making his way back to his room. Seeing as he had already won the experience bag, and there was still some time left, he had to learn how to cook spicy grilled fish first. That way, he would be able to cook delicious grilled fish for Amy tomorrow. After lying down on his bed, Meg opened the golden experience bag, and countless pieces of information flowed into his mind. How to cook a delicious spicy grilled fish required a lot of skill. The grilled fish in this recipe was most likely similar to the Wanzhou grilled fish in that it had to be grilled first before being stewed. However, there weren't as many side dishes, and it focused more on the flavor of the grilled fish. The level of spiciness could be adjusted according to the customer's needs, and there were 4 levels of spiciness: mild, medium, super spicy, and insanely spicy. Because this was a spicy grilled fish, there was naturally no non-spicy option. For Meg's taste buds, medium spicy was more suitable. In the Sichuan and Yu regions, medium spicy was already spicy enough, and only true warriors could eat super spicy. As for insanely spicy, Meg didn't know what that was. Perhaps only true insanely spicy eaters would be able to accept it. After browsing through the information in his mind, Meg found that it had already fused perfectly with his memory. If it weren't for the fact that he knew that this was a memory implanted by the system, he would have thought that he was once the king of spicy grilled fish. Looks like cooking spicy grilled fish really isn't an easy task, Meg murmured to himself as he pushed open the door to the test field for the god of cookery. White light flashed, and Meg appeared in the completely enclosed kitchen. Meg opened his eyes, and he had already completely digested the memory of the spicy grilled fish. Now, all he had to do was figure out how to perfectly utilize the cooking method in his mind to cook a delicious grilled fish. Let's take a look at the ingredients first. Meg withdrew his consciousness and made his way over to the fridge. There was now a new tank beside the prawns, and there were 7 large fish with colorful scales swimming happily in it. There were some differences in the size of these fish, with the longest being half a meter in length, and the smallest being only around 20 centimeters in length. They appeared to be rather similar to grass carps, but their bodies were slender and long, and the small scales on their bodies were shimmering with beautiful colors, just like marine fish. Boiling the old oil was a very important step in making the Wanzhou grilled fish. At the same time, it was also a very complicated job. Although the system had improved the process from 6 hours to 1 hour, during this process, one had to constantly stir the oil in the pot with a ladle. At the same time, one had to pay attention to the heat in order to make a pot of high-quality old oil. Other than the fact that the workload is a little heavy and boring, this shouldn't be too difficult, right? Meg lit the fire and placed the pot on the stove. Then, he poured the oil into the pot. He picked up a long ladle and began to stir the oil in the pot according to the method in his memory. Failure. No. You're so stupid. Meg was rejected by the system more than 10 times just by boiling a pot of old oil. Do you have to be so strict? Meg couldn't help but grumble. He poured the oil out of the wok, and a serious expression appeared on his face. He couldn't afford to waste so much time before he even touched the fish. He still had to wake up in the morning to open the restaurant. Ding! Congratulations, host. The old oil has met the requirements, the system's notification sounded. A smile appeared on Mag's face as he looked at the bubbling oil in the cauldron. Cooking really wasn't an easy task. Only by treating each and every step with the utmost rigor could one create the most delicious dishes. Meg picked up the fishbowl and fell silent as he looked at the rainbow-scaled grass carps swimming happily in the tank. It wasn't that he couldn't bear to kill them because they were too cute. It was just that killing fish was too foreign to him. It was as foreign as killing chickens. Even though he knew the best way to kill the rainbow-scaled grass carps, he still felt a little uncomfortable at the thought of having to cut open their bellies with a knife. If I don't go to hell, who will? If I can't even kill fish, then there's no need to make this spicy grilled fish. Xiaomi is still waiting to eat grilled fish. After standing in front of the tank in silence for a long while, a determined look appeared in Mag's eyes. He picked up the smallest grass carp and reached out to grab it. It was slippery and sticky to the touch, and he was struck by the urge to throw it away. However, before he could do anything, the rainbow-scaled grass carp whipped its tail and flew out of his hand. It fell back into the tank, creating a splash of water half a meter high that drenched Mag's face. Holy fuck. Even you dare to bully me? I'm going to kill you. Mag wiped the water off his face, and he was also enraged. He picked up the iridescent scale grass carp again, and smacked it on the head with his gold-rimmed kitchen knife, upon which it immediately quieted down. After killing the fish, Han Xiao cut open the back of the carp and removed its innards. He then carved a line on the carp and added all kinds of seasonings to marinate it. The oven was a new addition to the kitchen. It was easier to control the roasting process and was more suitable for mass roasting. There was no need to frequently flip the fish, so it wouldn't interfere with Meg's cooking. When the fish was half done, Han Xiao took it out and brushed it with a layer of old oil. When it was 90% done, he brushed it with another layer of old oil. At the same time, he sprinkled some cumin powder over it and roasted it for a while. He then took it out and placed it on a stainless steel plate with shredded onions. After that, he poured the sauce over the fish. Ginger, garlic, bean paste. All kinds of spices and seasonings were added into the pot one by one. A pot of fiery red sauce appeared and drizzled over the fish, allowing the fish to fully absorb the sauce. She took out another wok and stir-fried the Sichuan pepper and dried chili in the wok. The air was filled with a fragrant and spicy aroma. She poured it over the grilled fish and sprinkled it with some green onions. The bright red and green formed a sharp contrast. The perfectly roasted fish and the fragrant sauce made Meg gulp involuntarily. The familiar aroma was on par with the roasted fish he had eaten in the past. Failed, the system's cold voice sounded. Meg's hand froze as he picked up his chopsticks to try the fish. Although he knew that he couldn't pass on the first try, he suddenly didn't feel like tasting the fish after receiving such a blow from the system. "All right, I'll continue if it fails." Meg put down his chopsticks and walked over to the tank. Monotonous repetition and continuous improvement was something he was good at. Plate after plate of grilled fish was created by his hands, only to be rejected by the system over and over again. However, Meg didn't utter a single word of complaint throughout the entire process. Instead, his movements became more and more meticulous as he strove for perfection in every single step. Chapter 338. 52 days had already passed, and Meg couldn't remember just how many servings of grilled fish he had made. All he knew was that in the past, even the smallest rainbow-scaled grass carp would run away when he tried to catch it. Now, he was able to fish out the largest rainbow-scaled grass carp from a fish tank, knock it unconscious, slaughter it, and clean it within 15 seconds. Meg felt like even the aunties selling fish in the wet market wouldn't be as fast as him. Meg was quite calm as he waited for the system's judgment. In any case, he had already been rejected countless times. If he was rejected again, he would just move on to the next one. If he had to blame someone, he could only blame himself for being too pretentious in his past life. He was already eating grilled fish that was publicly acknowledged as authentic, yet he still had to add even higher requirements. All of the things that had made things difficult for others in his past life were now making things difficult for himself. Since I'm going to make grilled fish, then I have to make it perfect. Otherwise, how am I going to live up to my reputation? Meg thought to himself as a smile appeared on his face. Compared to the boring practice in the test field for the god of cookery, he felt like everything was worth it after seeing the joyful smiles on the faces of Amy and the other customers as they tasted the delicacies. According to the requirements set by the host, 1. The skin of the fish must be crispy but not charred. The flesh of the fish must be as tender as tofu but not scattered. Achieved. 2. The broth must be oily but not greasy. It must be spicy but not pungent. Achieved. 3. The aroma of the fish must be alluring and distinct. It must not be overshadowed by the other ingredients and spices. Achieved. All 3 requirements have been met. Congratulations to the host for learning the spicy grilled fish. At the same time, you have unlocked the right to purchase the ingredients required for the spicy grilled fish, as well as the right to use the corresponding kitchenware. The system's voice sounded with a hint of encouragement in its voice. Looks like I'm quite talented when it comes to grilled fish. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he looked at the grilled fish covered in bright red sauce and chili. He couldn't help but swallow involuntarily. All he had to do now was place the grilled fish on an alcohol stove, and a delicious spicy grilled fish would be ready to be served. Would the host like to taste the grilled fish? If not, you can leave the test field for the god of cookery now, the system replied. I won't be tasting it this time. I'm waiting to eat it with Amy. But system, can I not go out first? Anyway, there are still a few hours before morning. Why don't you bring me that sword and let me practice my swordsmanship in this test field for the god of cooking? Meg shook his head and said with a smile. He had already planned this out. He could only practice for an hour every night, and he still had to consider his stamina, body recovery, and other problems. However, things were different in the test field for the god of cookery. He could practice day and night, and he didn't have to worry about physical exhaustion or the need for rest. If he practiced for dozens of days without sleep, he should be able to perfectly master the strongest sword technique that he could use in his current state. The second way to enter the test field for the god of cooking was to enter the sword god test field. The test field for the god of cookery was created to allow the host to quickly master the cooking methods of dishes. Wouldn't it be inappropriate for the host to do other unrelated things here? The system's voice carried a hint of hesitation. What's inappropriate about it? Isn't it just practicing my swordsmanship? There are no outsiders here. System, you clearly gave me 365 days to practice diligently and complete the learning tasks in advance. As for the rest of the time, I'm free to do whatever I want. That should be appropriate, right? Meg said with a serious face. He didn't blush in the slightest as he spoke. Materializing the long sword requires additional energy. Furthermore, if the host wishes to practice swordsmanship, the host will definitely need to expand the space. The system stopped halfway through its sentence, but the meaning it wanted to express was very clear. System, just tell me, how much do you want? In any case, I won't give you any more than that. Meg pursed his lips. Huh? How did you know what I wanted to say? The system asked in surprise. Ho, don't tell me that I should be silly and ask, system, are there any restrictions? That would make me seem stupid. Meg rolled his eyes. Everyone knew about the system's mentality. The fee is 10 gold coins per session. The system was silent for a while and then said as if it had considered it carefully. The price is not a problem. But in this case, I need an empty room of about 10 square meters. Meg nodded. The price was a little cheaper than he had expected. When traveling, some people would choose to take cheaper but longer cars to save money, while others would choose to take high-speed trains or planes to save time. People without money would spend time to save money, while rich people would spend money to save time. This was a common phenomenon. Using 10 gold coins to exchange for tens of days of swordsmanship without sleep and rest, Meg felt that it was worth it. He could be considered half a rich man now, because he already knew where the money he earned would go before he even got his hands on it. Deal. The system replied decisively. White light flashed in the kitchen that Meg was in, and everything disappeared, transforming into a sealed room of about 10 square meters. A long sword appeared in Meg's hand. It was his sword. Chapter 339. The smile on Warren's face immediately stiffened, and the entire conference room gradually fell silent. Everyone looked on with peculiar expressions. Robert had a special status as he had been transferred here from the city lord's castle, so he was somewhat different from the other vice presidents. However, due to his overly straightforward personality, President Warren had never liked him, and he had been reduced to a mere figurehead. As such, his status in the Catering Association was rather awkward. Vice President Robert, I know that you like to visit all of the restaurants, but I don't agree with what you're saying. This restaurant has only been open for less than a month, so setting aside how it's managed to attract so many customers, we've just seen the prices of the dishes in these restaurants. Even the cheapest dish costs 200 copper coins, while the most expensive dish costs 800 copper coins. Even high-class restaurants wouldn't dare to charge such prices, yet this small restaurant is charging such a high price. Do you think it's reasonable? Tonis, who was sitting beside Warren, turned to Robert with a hint of mockery in his eyes. He was Warren's right-hand man, and he was also a vice president of the Catering Association, so he was rather disdainful of this unscrupulous vice president. That's right. With such a high price, there's no way they'll be able to attract so many customers in such a short time. Theodore nodded in agreement. All of the vice presidents had been groomed by Warren, and they had been living a good life under Warren's tutelage. From time to time, they would receive a couple of handsome bonuses, and their lives had been very blissful. However, due to Robert's stubbornness, they had no choice but to restrain themselves a lot during the past 2 years, so they viewed him as a thorn in their side. Now that he was directly contradicting Warren, they naturally couldn't tolerate this. Even though Robert had been transferred here from the City Lord's castle, the Catering Association wasn't a powerful organization, so he definitely didn't have any say in the City Lord's castle. That restaurant was able to attract so many customers in less than a month due to its extremely delicious food. Even though it's such a high price, I still think it's appropriate because I tasted the most expensive braised chicken and rice and the most controversial tofu pudding at that restaurant that day. Those 2 dishes were far more delicious than anything I've ever tasted before, so I think it's very appropriate for me to be able to taste such delicacies at such a price. I even feel like I've made a profit, Robert replied with a calm expression. Over the past few days, Amy's had been steadily rising in the rankings, especially her braised chicken and rice, which had risen to 21st place. Today's votes had yet to be tabulated, but at this rate, it shouldn't be a problem for her to enter the top 20. Robert had anticipated that Mamie's meteoric rise to the top of the rankings would cause some discontent within the Catering Association, but he didn't think that these people would rely on their own subjective assumptions to remove Mamie from the rankings without any evidence. This kind of behavior made Robert feel ashamed and angry, but he could only endure it. He was fighting alone here. Mamie's was an exceptional restaurant, and a restaurant like that deserved to be promoted and respected. It should become a brand in the Aiden Square, not be removed from the rankings just because it was interfering with the interests of some people. I'm very supportive of Vice President Roberts' decision to taste Amy's dishes in person, but what you're saying is very subjective, so I'm not convinced. I've always believed in evidence, and before I see it for myself, I'd rather believe in the data and evidence that I've seen. Warren's small eyes narrowed into slits as he looked at Robert, and he shook his head as he said, "It appears that there is indeed something wrong with this restaurant. I don't know why Vice President Robert is so insistent on supporting it. President Warren, I think this is a restaurant with a lot of potential. In fact, it could even become the most renowned restaurant in the Aiden Square in the near future. What I'm saying is all based on what I've seen and tasted. I'm not endorsing anyone." In contrast, President Warren was using some common sense to judge whether a restaurant's ranking was normal or not, and he wasn't supporting a certain restaurant that had been suppressed by Mamie Restaurant. "If you insist on removing Mamie Restaurant from the rankings board, then I'll report this matter to the City Lord and get him to uphold justice." Robert abruptly rose to his feet as he glared at Warren. The conference room fell silent again, and Tonis and Theodore also shut their mouths. This matter involved the City Lord, so they didn't have the right to intervene. There's no need for you to report this matter to the City Lord, I'll report this matter to him. If our catering association can't accommodate someone like you, then I'll ask the City Lord to move you somewhere else." Warren chuckled coldly with an extremely cold expression. "Without an order from the City Lord, I won't leave the catering association. President Warren, I hope you still remember the promise that you made when you took over as president from the previous president." Robert turned and strode out of the room. "That bastard." Warren looked at Robert's departing figure, and he suddenly recalled that there was a white-haired old man sitting in front of a few dilapidated tables, holding his hands and telling him about the future of the catering association. He had also handed over a bunch of keys to him in a solemn manner, making him the owner of this place. On that day, he had said many things and promised many things. "President, what should we do now?" Tonis interrupted Warren's train of thought. "Remove the rankings, of course. Tonis, come with me to Mamie's tomorrow. Everything requires evidence, so let's go get it." Warren smiled as he rose to his feet. "All right." Tonis hurriedly nodded. After the crowd dispersed, a bald middle-aged man with a big belly followed Warren into a room at the side. "Stanley, go and tell young Master Cyril that his restaurant will no longer appear on the rankings board, and it won't appear again from now on. Warren picked up the wine bottle on the table and poured a glass of wine into a transparent crystal glass. He swirled the red wine in the glass before taking a sip with a smile on his face. "Yes, President." Stanley hurriedly nodded before quickly departing. Warren took another sip of wine, and murmured to himself, "It's just a small restaurant. In the Aiden Square, if I want you to make a fortune, you'll make a fortune. If I want you to close down, you'll have to close down. For a restaurant, nothing is more important than reputation." In Cyril's courtyard. "Very good. Thank you for your help, Director Stanley and President Warren. I'm sure the Aiden Square food competition will only continue to improve under the impartiality of the Catering Association. I hope our partnership will continue to grow. Cheers." Cyril raised his glass with a smile on his face as he toasted to Stanley. "Young Master Cyril is right, working with you is the best thing that could have happened." Stanley hurriedly raised his glass with a fawning smile. He had also reaped a lot of benefits from this. It really was easy to earn money from a major family, and after tasting the benefits, he hoped that a few more restaurants like this would appear in the future. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.